Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden corners and forgotten secrets of Skyrim's capital city, Solitude. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next adventure. The natural stone arch foundation. Solitude sits perched on a natural stone arch that rises dramatically from the Sea of Ghosts, creating one of Skyrim's most iconic architectural views. What many players never realize is that this arch isn't just a visual spectacle created for dramatic effect. The game's environmental artists based it on real-world rock formations found along Norway's coastline, particularly the natural bridges created by centuries of erosion and tidal forces. The arch itself would require enormous structural support in reality to prevent collapse under the weight of an entire city. If you examine the underside carefully, using careful positioning or free camera mods, you can spot wooden reinforcements and stone buttresses that the city's engineers supposedly installed over generations to prevent catastrophic collapse. These engineering details suggest that Solitude's founders chose this precarious location specifically for its defensive advantages, making traditional siege warfare nearly impossible since attackers cannot surround the city. The lighthouse that doesn't exist. Eagle-eyed explorers notice something peculiar about Solitude's harbour when they scan the coastline. There's a lighthouse clearly visible from certain angles near the docks, standing as a sentinel over the dangerous waters, but you can never actually reach it or interact with it in any meaningful way. This lighthouse was originally intended to be a fully explorable location in early development builds of the game. Data miners who examined Skyrim's game files discovered unused interior cells, specifically labeled Solitude Lighthouse Interior, that would have contained a small living quarters for the lighthouse keeper, storage for oil and supplies, and a spiraling staircase leading up to the beacon room at the top. The associated quest line involved helping a retired ship captain who maintained the light, dealing with his failing eyesight and memories of ships he'd guided safely to port over decades of service. However, the entire sequence was cut before the game's release, leaving only the exterior model as a distant, unreachable landmark that taunts completionist players. Elisif's Secret Grief Collection. The Jarl of Solitude, Elisif the Fair, displays remarkable outward composure and political grace following her husband Torgig's brutal assassination at the hands of Ulfric Stormcloak. However, environmental storytelling within the Blue Palace reveals the depth of her private anguish that she hides from her court and subjects. In her personal quarters within the palace's residential wing, tucked away in a shadowed corner, you'll find a locked chest that can only be opened with extremely high lockpicking skills, or the appropriate key, which doesn't appear in normal gameplay. Inside this chest sits a carefully preserved collection of Torgig's personal effects that Elisif visits when she believes she's alone. These include his favorite drinking horn engraved with their intertwined initials, love letters he wrote during their courtship describing his dreams for Skyrim's future, a simple iron ring that was his first gift to her before he became High King, and a lock of his hair wrapped in silk. Most players never see these items because the chest is tucked away and the lock difficulty deters casual inspection, but they humanize Elisif beyond her political role as imperial puppet. The Bard's College Bell Tower Secret. The Bard's College features a prominent bell tower that chimes at specific in-game times, marking the hours and calling students to their lessons. What few players discover through exploration is that you can actually climb to the bell chamber itself through a hidden route. A concealed ladder on the building's exterior, partially obscured by wooden scaffolding, leads to a small maintenance platform where you can ring the bell manually by activating it. If you ring this bell exactly 7 times at midnight game time, a ghostly apparition briefly appears on the college grounds below before fading into mist. This ghost is believed to be Giraud Germain's predecessor as headmaster, a master bard who allegedly died in a suspicious fall from this very tower decades before the game's events begin. The game files identify this spectre as Bard Ghost 1, but programming it to only appear during this specific trigger condition means that the vast majority of players never witness this supernatural occurrence, and it serves no quest purpose whatsoever. The Emperor's Reserve Dock. When Emperor Titus Meded II arrives in Solitude during the Dark Brotherhood questline, his ship docks at a special pier that's normally completely inaccessible to players under any legitimate circumstances. This dock was constructed specifically for royal visits and diplomatic arrivals, featuring distinctive imperial standards, expensive purple banners bearing the dragon symbol, and polished marble posts that contrast sharply with the weathered salt-stained wood of the common merchant piers. After the related questline concludes with the Emperor's assassination, this dock remains permanently blocked by invisible collision barriers that prevent player access. However, if you use console commands or exploit certain glitches to bypass these barriers and access the restricted area, you'll find that several Imperial Legion soldiers stand eternal guard there, cycling through ambient dialogue discussing rumors about the assassination and the political implications for the Empire. They remain at their posts indefinitely, a monument to duty even though the Emperor they were sworn to protect is dead and buried. Vittoria Vici's wedding preparations. The wedding ceremony that Dark Brotherhood players can interrupt during their assassination contract took weeks of in-game preparation time that most players never witness. If you visit Solitude repeatedly in the days and weeks before the ceremony is scheduled to occur, you'll notice workers gradually decorating the courtyard near the Temple of the Divines. Flower arrangements appear in stages, with fresh blooms being delivered daily. Banners bearing the Vici family colours get hung from buildings. Food tables get positioned and then laden with increasingly elaborate displays. Servants can be overheard discussing seating arrangements and menu selections. NPCs throughout the city discuss the upcoming celebration with increasing frequency, some expressing happiness for the couple, while others grumble about the expense and spectacle during wartime. This attention to atmospheric detail creates a living city, where major events cast shadows before they occur, making the eventual assassination feel like it disrupts real lives, rather than just triggering a quest objective. The Pelagius Wing's hidden chamber. The Pelagius Wing of the Blue Palace, where players enter the Mad Emperor's mind during Sheogorath's Daedric quest, contains a hidden room that exists in the physical world, but not in the mental landscape you explore. Behind a false wall in the southeastern corner of the wing, accessible only through no-clip console commands, sits a small chamber containing Pelagius the Mad's actual personal effects from his troubled life. There's a journal describing his descent into madness with increasingly erratic handwriting, toys from his childhood including a stuffed mud crab, and disturbing paintings he created during his rule that depict nightmarish visions and prophetic images. The developers clearly intended this space to provide physical context for the quest's surreal events, but they ultimately moved the exposition entirely into the dream sequence itself for better pacing. The room remains fully detailed, properly lit, and textured in the game files, suggesting it was cut relatively late in the development process when they realized players would never have reason to explore the Pelagius Wing outside the quest context. Solitude's hidden sewer community. Beneath the city streets runs an elaborate sewer network that players only glimpse during the initial escape from execution sequence at the game's beginning, if they choose the Imperial side. These sewers connect every major building in Solitude through maintenance tunnels and waste channels, providing a secondary transportation network for workers and waste removal that most citizens prefer not to think about. If you return to these sewers after the initial sequence using creative positioning or console commands, you'll discover that they're populated by homeless NPCs who've established a small, underground community in the forgotten spaces. These characters have their own microeconomy, trading stolen goods and scraps amongst themselves. They possess unique dialogue discussing their exile from surface society, the reasons they ended up below, and their daily struggles to survive in the darkness. Most players never encounter these people because the sewers have no legitimate quest markers pointing back to them after the opening hours, making them effectively invisible content that adds depth to Solitude's social stratification. The Winking Skeever's Lost Cellar. The Winking Skeever Tavern has a wine cellar that's frequently mentioned in NPC dialogue, but never actually shown to players in the accessible game world. The tavern keeper, Corpulus Vinius, occasionally mentions checking the cellar for his best vintages when discussing his inventory. A wooden trapdoor visible behind the bar seems to lead downward into storage spaces below. Data miners examining the game's files found a fully modelled cellar interior, complete with wine racks holding hundreds of bottles, stored food supplies for the kitchen, and even sleeping quarters for the tavern staff members. The cellar also contained a small shrine to Dibella tucked into an alcove, suggesting that Corpulus or his employees worshipped the goddess of beauty and passion there privately. The decision to cut player access to this area was likely made for performance optimization reasons, as every interior cell requires memory allocation and loading time. However, the cellar's existence in the code suggests Bethesda initially planned more detailed exploration of Solitude's buildings. Falk Firebeard's Supernatural Archive. Falk Firebeard, the steward of the Blue Palace, and Elisif's most trusted advisor, maintains a private study separate from his official administrative office, where he conducts extensive research into supernatural threats facing the hold. This room, hidden behind a locked door that most players never notice or attempt to open, contains an impressive library of books on vampire hunting techniques, werewolf lore and silver weaponry, and detailed notes about various Daedric cults operating throughout Harfinger Hold. The study reveals that Falk takes his protective duties far more seriously than his urbane public demeanour might suggest. He's documented every strange occurrence in the region for decades, creating a comprehensive archive of paranormal activity that would be invaluable to scholars. One particularly interesting document discusses rumours of a vampire coven operating within Solitude itself, possibly among the nobility, with Falk's notes expressing frustration at his inability to identify the creatures without proof. This hints at Sybille Stentor's true nature and suggests Falk may suspect but cannot act without evidence. The repeating execution schedule. While players personally witness Rogvir's execution in the main square upon first entering Solitude, creating a memorable introduction to the city's harsh justice, that execution block sees much more use if you pay attention to the city's schedule over time. Every 10 in-game days, the block is prepared for another execution that occurs during hours when most players aren't observing. Guards discuss the upcoming event in their patrol dialogue. Townsfolk gather in the square to witness the spectacle. And afterward, NPCs debate in taverns whether the condemned truly deserve their fate, or if imperial justice has become too severe. These background executions happen without player involvement or witnesses, with the victims never being named characters, but rather generic criminals mentioned only in passing. The practice demonstrates that Solitude maintains ruthlessly efficient justice as a deterrent to crime. Interestingly, bloodstains that appear on the execution block after each killing persist for exactly 1 full day before cleaning crews arrive to scrub them away, ready for the next condemned prisoner. Styr's advanced embalming knowledge. Styr, the priest who manages Solitude's Hall of the Dead with quiet efficiency, practices embalming techniques that are remarkably advanced for Skyrim's generally medieval technology level and Nordic cultural practices. If you examine his workstation closely in the preparation room, you'll find specialized surgical tools, chemical preservation fluids in labeled bottles, and detailed anatomical diagrams that suggest extensive formal training rather than simple traditional methods. Styr's dialogue, if you engage him in conversation beyond the typical merchant interface, reveals he learned his craft during years spent studying in Cyrodiil, where imperial death customs involve much more elaborate preparation of bodies than Nordic traditions typically require. The Hall of the Dead contains bodies in various states of preparation, and Styr follows a careful, methodical process for each one based on the deceased's social status and family wishes. He also keeps meticulous records of every person interred in the catacombs, including detailed notes about their cause of death. These records, written in books scattered throughout the hall, contain subtle hints about several unsolved murders in Solitude's recent history that could form the basis of investigations, though no quest utilized this information. The Blue Palace's living garden. The Blue Palace courtyard features an ornamental garden that actually changes with Skyrim's seasons, something most players never notice because they rely on fast travel, rather than spending time observing the natural passage of days and months. During spring months, snowdrops and frost flowers bloom in carefully tended beds. Summer brings hardy mountain roses and alpine wildflowers. Autumn sees the addition of decorative gourds, dried wheat arrangements, and harvested vegetables displayed as offerings. Winter returns the garden to a sparse, snow-covered state, with only evergreen shrubs providing colour. A dedicated gardener NPC tends these plants on a fixed daily schedule, and if you talk to her repeatedly across different seasons, she shares her philosophy about finding beauty in harsh northern climates where most plants cannot survive. She also mentions somewhat ominously that one particular flower bed refuses to grow anything despite her best efforts and various soil treatments, supposedly because a tragic death occurred on that exact spot decades ago, and the ground remains cursed. Castle Dour's strategic war room. General Tullius conducts imperial military planning in a war room inside Castle Dour that contains far more strategic detail than most players observe during their brief visits for quest purposes. The massive table dominating the center of the room features an intricately detailed scale model of all of Skyrim, complete with colored markers representing current troop positions, supply line routes, and strategic objectives identified by Legion intelligence. These markers aren't just decorative props, they actually update dynamically based on your progress through the Civil War questline, reflecting newly captured forts and shifted battle lines after major engagements. If you take time to examine the model closely after significant Imperial victories, you'll notice the changes to occupied territories. The walls display hand-drawn maps showing projected Stormcloak movement patterns, intelligence reports about Ulfric's military capabilities and resources, and casualty estimates for various battle scenarios the Legion has wargamed. This attention to detail reinforces that a genuine military campaign is being prosecuted with professional competence, not just abstract quest objectives. Bairand's distant daughter. Beirand, the skilled blacksmith working at Castle Dour, who supplies the Imperial Legion, occasionally mentions his daughter in passing dialogue that's easy to miss among the typical merchant interactions. She currently lives far away in Cyrodiil, training at the Arcane University to become an Imperial battle mage rather than following her father into smithing. Beirand keeps a collection of her letters in his personal quarters, and reading them through careful snooping reveals a warm, loving father-daughter relationship despite the geographic distance separating them. She writes enthusiastically about her studies in destruction magic and alteration, asks detailed questions about his work crafting armor for the Legion soldiers, and expresses constant worry about the Civil War's outcome and her father's safety so close to the fighting. In her most recent letter, she mentions tentative plans to visit Solitude during a break from her studies, but this visit never actually occurs during the game's timeline. These letters humanize Beirand beyond his simple role as a merchant, showing the personal costs Skyrim's brutal conflict inflicts on families separated by duty, distance, and circumstance. Radiant Raiment's mysterious commission. The upscale clothing shop Radiant Raiment caters primarily to Solitude's wealthy elite, who can afford their expensive imported garments. However, the proprietor, Tari, occasionally mentions during certain conversation branches a mysterious client who commissions very specific garments through unusual methods. If you gain her trust through repeated high-value purchases and completing the related quest to help the shop, she'll reveal that this client claims to represent someone connected to Pantaea, the Wolf Queen. The requests arrive through anonymous notes left at the shop overnight, accompanied by payment in ancient gold coins from the First Era that are technically priceless historical artifacts. Tari fulfills these disturbing orders because the money is genuine and spends perfectly well, but she's increasingly unsettled by the situation and the implications. The garments requested are always burial clothes in the style of ancient Nordic royalty, suggesting someone is conducting necromantic rituals in Pantaea's name, or perhaps preparing for her eventual resurrection. This thread connects to the Wolf Queen quest line but adds disturbing depth beyond what the main quest reveals. Angeline's lost daughter. Mystery. Angeline Morad runs Angeline's aromatics apothecary shop, but her daughter disappeared years ago under mysterious circumstances that haunt her daily. This tragic backstory only emerges through a specific dialogue branch that many players never explore fully, requiring building relationship through repeated visits. Angeline's daughter, Fura, was a promising young alchemist who travelled extensively to various holds, researching rare ingredients and documenting their properties. She vanished while investigating reports of unique alchemical flora growing in the marshes surrounding Mortal. Angeline maintains desperate hope that Fura is somehow alive, perhaps having suffered memory loss or been taken prisoner. If you happen to find Fura's amulet, which spawns randomly in one of Skyrim's many dungeons, with the location varying for each playthrough, and bring it to Angeline, it triggers a heartbreaking scene where she realizes her daughter is dead. The amulet's randomized location means some players may encounter encounter it, leaving Angeline's story permanently unresolved. Returning the amulet doesn't solve the mystery of how Fura died, but provides Angeline with painful closure, allowing her to stop wondering and begin grieving properly. Fihada's secret artistic life. Fihada, who works as a fletcher at Bairand's forge, crafting arrows and bows for Legion use, is primarily known only for this practical craft by players who interact with him. However, examining his private quarters through dedicated snooping reveals he's also a remarkably talented painter with an artist's soul hidden beneath his craftsman exterior. The walls of his room display carefully executed landscapes of various Skyrim locations, all painted from memory during his travels as a younger man, before settling into steady work in Solitude. The paintings are detailed and atmospheric enough that you can identify specific landmarks if you're familiar with the locations. The majestic throat of the world rising above the clouds, the serene waters of Lake Ilinalta reflecting the sky, and the rushing rapids of the White River. Fihada never discusses this artistic side of his personality in any dialogue, and his conversations focus entirely on his practical fletcher's craft. This hidden aspect suggests that many Skyrim NPCs possess rich inner lives, talents and dreams that players never discover because the game simply cannot expose every detail of hundreds of characters' depths and complexities. East Empire Company corruption. The East Empire Company's operations in Solitude involve significantly more corruption and illegal activity than the main blood on the Ice Quest line reveals during your investigation. Documents scattered throughout their warehouse, if you take time to read them rather than just stealing valuables, detail extensive schemes to avoid paying imperial taxes through false accounting, bribe city officials to ignore safety violations, and systematically intimidate smaller competitors out of business. One particularly damning ledger shows regular payments to Captain Aldis of the Solitude Guard, strongly suggesting he deliberately looks the other way during the company's illegal operations in exchange for gold. Another set of papers discusses elaborate plans to manipulate trade routes through artificial scarcity, bankrupting smaller merchants who depend on those routes. The corruption extends to systematic exploitation of dock workers, who are paid partially in company scrip redeemable only at company-owned stores, where prices are deliberately inflated, trapping workers in perpetual debt while technically paying them legal wages. This economic injustice operates openly, while authorities ignore it, showing how Solitude's prosperity is built partly on exploitation. Evette-san's economic struggles. Evette-san operates a small market stall in Solitude's main courtyard, selling produce she grows herself on a small farm outside the city walls. Her personal story, revealed through scattered dialogue and a minor quest that many players miss entirely, illustrates the daily struggles faced by Solitude's common merchants. She's fallen seriously behind on rent payments owed to the city for her stall space and faces imminent eviction that would destroy her livelihood. The quest to help her involves recovering a shipment of valuable spices from bandits who ambushed her caravan. But even after resolving this crisis, she continues to struggle financially if you check back with her weeks later. She discusses in subsequent conversations how wealthy merchants like those at Radiant Raiment use their influence with city officials to squeeze out small independent traders, creating effective monopolies. She represents the countless NPCs who exist in Skyrim's economy without the resources, connections, or advantages to prosper, providing a ground-level view of the class disparity and economic injustice that permeates Tamriel's supposedly enlightened society. The invisible city maintenance workers. Solitude's windows remain remarkably clean and the streets surprisingly free of waste, despite the harsh coastal weather and thousands of daily residents. And close observation reveals the invisible workforce maintaining this cleanliness. On specific days following a set schedule, NPC workers can be seen carrying buckets, rags and brooms through the streets on established maintenance routes. They follow predetermined paths, stopping at each major building and public area. While the workers don't actually interact with the windows or streets due to animation limitations in the game engine, their presence and dialogue acknowledge this essential maintenance work. They complain realistically about stubborn bird droppings, corrosive salt spray from the nearby sea, and demanding property owners who expect impossible standards. One worker grumbles about having to clean blood from the execution block. This detail exists purely for atmospheric purposes rather than gameplay mechanics, contributing to Solitude's feeling as a genuinely functioning city, where mundane maintenance work continues regardless of the player's epic dragon-slaying adventures. The temple's architectural history. The Temple of the Divines in Solitude stands as the largest single religious structure anywhere in Skyrim, but its architectural style reveals a complicated construction history that most players never analyze. The foundation and lower walls are built from stones that don't match the local quarries geologically, suggesting they were expensively imported from Cyrodiil or salvaged from an earlier structure that once occupied the site. Historical records found in books scattered throughout Solitude mention that the current temple was reconstructed during the Third Era, after the original structure burned down during riots protesting controversial imperial religious policies. The current design incorporates distinctly Cyrodiilic architectural elements uncommon in traditional Nordic buildings, particularly the rounded arches, decorative columns, and dome ceilings. This fusion of architectural styles represents the Empire's cultural influence on Skyrim and the gradual erosion of pure Nordic traditions. The temple's impressive size and grandeur also serve an obvious political purpose beyond mere worship, reminding all visitors of imperial power, wealth, and cultural sophistication. Roland's internal conflict. Roland, the head priest at the Temple of the Divines, faces a profound personal conflict between his imperial religious duties and his Nordic heritage that occasionally surfaces in his dialogue. While publicly maintaining strict adherence to the imperial ban on Talos worship as required by the White Gold Concordat, Roland privately struggles with this restriction in ways that a hidden note reveals. A carefully concealed letter in his personal quarters expresses serious doubt about the Concordat's religious legitimacy and questions whether political convenience and military necessity should dictate religious doctrine and theological truth. He never acts on these doubts or expresses them publicly, remaining loyally committed to his appointed position, but the note reveals genuine internal conflict and spiritual struggle. Some players interpret this reluctance to act as simple cowardice, while others see it as a realistic portrayal of someone caught between personal conscience and professional duty in an authoritarian system where dissent carries severe consequences. His silent suffering represents countless citizens wrestling with the compromises war demands, the Katariah's captured origins. The Emperor's personal ship, the Katariah, has a fascinating history that predates its current prestigious service to the imperial throne. Documents found in the captain's quarters during the Dark Brotherhood questline, if you take time to read them carefully, reveal that the vessel was actually captured from Somerset Isle pirates during a brutal naval engagement roughly 20 years before the game's events. Rather than scrapping the captured ship or selling it, the Empire's Admiralty recognized its superior construction and retrofitted it as an imperial transport and eventual flagship. The Katariah's distinctive design reflects traditional Ultima shipbuilding techniques, particularly its magically reinforced hull and sophisticated preservation enchantments worked into the wood itself. These enchantments, carefully maintained by Imperial battle mages assigned to the ship, prevent rot and weather damage that would normally destroy wooden vessels, explaining how the ship remains perfectly seaworthy for decades. The ship's current name honors a former empress, but High Elf sailors throughout Tamriel consider its continued service flying Imperial colours an ongoing insult to their people and craftsmanship. Jala's unspoken romantic interest. Jala, a young woman working as a server at the Winking Skeever tavern, harbours romantic feelings for someone in Solitude that she never acts upon or openly expresses. Careful observation of her behaviour throughout the day reveals that she subtly watches Captain Aldis from afar, adjusting her daily schedule and choosing routes through the city to coincide with his established patrol times. She never speaks to him beyond brief, polite greetings when their paths cross, clearly assuming he's beyond her social station and would never consider a relationship with a common tavern worker. This unrequited affection is never addressed in any quest or dialogue tree, existing purely as a background detail visible only through her program movement patterns and NPC scheduling. If you use console commands to force direct interaction between them beyond their usual scripts, they only exchange generic NPC dialogue, as no romantic path was ever programmed into the game. This reflects Bethesda's philosophy that not every story thread needs resolution or player involvement, creating a world that feels genuinely lived in, rather than existing solely for the player's benefit and interaction. The Headsman's ancient tradition. The The executioner who beheads Rogvir and other condemned prisoners follows traditions dating back many centuries in Solitude's harsh justice system. If you speak extensively with city guards about executions and crime, they explain that the headsman's role is strictly hereditary, passed from father to son through an unbroken line. The current executioner, whose name is never spoken aloud per tradition, inherited both the grim position and the ceremonial axe from his father, who inherited it from his father before him, stretching back generations. The axe itself bears subtle enchantments to ensure clean, quick deaths, considered a mercy in Nordic culture, where a botched execution brings shame. The headsman lives in a small home outside Solitude's city walls, as ancient superstition holds that one who deals death professionally brings misfortune and bad luck to neighbours. Despite this social isolation and the grim nature of his work, the position commands grudging respect, as the headsman serves justice on behalf of the Jarl and maintains order through fear. The late-night gambling operation. In the Winking Skeever's back rooms, a regular gambling operation runs during late-night hours when most respectable citizens sleep. While the game doesn't allow players to actually participate in these illegal games, NPCs discuss their winnings and losses in ambient dialogue that you can overhear if you're present during the right hours. The games include dice rolling, card games imported from Cyrodiil, and betting on fabricated reports of gladiatorial matches from the Imperial City's arena. Pelagius Wing, the tavern keeper, takes a substantial cut of the house profits in exchange for providing the space and keeping guards from investigating too closely. Interestingly, some guards actually participate in the games while off duty, creating a system of mutual protection and corruption. The gambling ring represents Solitude's grey economy, where technically illegal activities persist openly because they serve social functions, provide entertainment, and don't threaten public order. The operation would be shut down if it became too visible or if higher authorities demanded action. Sorex Vinius's secret musical ambitions. Sorex Vinius, son of the Winking Skeever's owner Corpulus, has ambitions that extend far beyond tavern work and family business, which he shares if you build sufficient rapport through repeated conversations. He dreams of becoming a bard and performing at the famous Bard's College, having secretly practiced the lute for years in private. His father dismisses these artistic aspirations entirely, expecting Sorex to eventually take over the family tavern and continue the profitable business. Sorex's room contains a hidden lute stored under his bed, an original sheet music he's composed himself, never played for audiences. His songs, which you never actually hear in-game, allegedly tell stories of Solitude's common people, the dock workers, servants, and craftsmen who make the city function, but whose stories never get told in traditional heroic ballads. Sorex represents people throughout Skyrim trapped between family expectations and personal desires, unable to pursue their passions because practical economic concerns and duty demand otherwise. His quiet suffering adds human dimension to background NPCs. The economic competition among smiths, Bairand's monopoly on smithing services at Castle Dour, secured through his exclusive contract with the Imperial Legion, faces quiet resentment from other crafters in Solitude who feel unfairly excluded from lucrative military work. Bits, who runs a general goods store, occasionally grumbles in dialogue about how military contracts distort the local economy, artificially raising prices on raw materials while common citizens struggle to afford basic metal goods and repairs. This economic tension reflects broader issues throughout war-torn Skyrim, where the civil war disrupts normal trade patterns and military needs consistently take priority over civilian welfare. Bairand himself seems genuinely unaware of the resentments his success causes, focused entirely on fulfilling his obligations to the Legion and maintaining quality. His obliviousness to the economic hardship his exclusive contract causes for competitors illustrates how different social classes experience the same events from vastly different perspectives and with different consequences. Solitude's cut grey quarter. Early in Skyrim's development process, Solitude was planned to have its own equivalent of Windhelm's infamous Grey Quarter, a district where Dunmer refugees would live in poverty and face discrimination. Evidence of this cut content appears in early concept art showing a specific neighbourhood, with distinctive Dunmer architecture uncomfortably grafted onto Solitude's Nordic buildings, creating visual tension. The decision to remove this district likely came from wanting to differentiate the cities thematically and make Windhelm specifically notorious for its treatment of dark elves, rather than spreading the theme across multiple cities. However, scattered dialogue still contains references to a foreign quarter in Solitude, where non-Nords supposedly cluster, suggesting remnants of this earlier design survived into the final script. The actual city lacks any such clearly defined district in the release game, showing how game development involves constant revision, cutting of content, and evolution of themes. The removed quarter would have added complexity to Solitude's portrayal. Atar's mysterious warrior. Past. Atar, Solitude's official executioner, reveals very little about his background or how he came to his current grim position, but environmental clues scattered throughout his home paint an intriguing picture. His modest dwelling contains weapons far beyond what an executioner would normally need, including several rare enchanted blades and exotic armor pieces from various provinces across Tamriel. Books on his shelves discuss advanced combat techniques used by master swordsmen, assassination methods, and military strategy. These possessions strongly suggest Atar had a previous career as a successful adventurer, mercenary, or soldier before settling into his current role. One partially burned letter fragment mentions leaving that life behind and seeking simpler work where the enemies are already defeated. This implies that serving as executioner represents retirement for Atar, a way to utilize his considerable combat skills and experience with death without facing the dangers of his former profession. Players who befriend him through repeated interactions never learn his full story, as he consistently deflects personal questions with curt responses. The missing children explained. Solitude has notably fewer children than other major cities throughout Skyrim, and there's actually an in-law explanation that most players completely miss. Dialogue with various parents and wealthy citizens reveals that aristocratic families routinely send their children to prestigious boarding schools in Cyrodiil, considering it both safer during the Civil War and more prestigious than local Nordic education. The few children who remain in the city come from families who can't afford this expensive option or choose to keep their children close despite the risks. This practice reflects deep anxiety among Solitude's elite about the Civil War's potential impact on their children and heirs. It also demonstrates class division quite starkly, as common folk must keep their children nearby out of economic necessity, while the wealthy can literally export their offspring to perceive safety in the imperial heartland. The practice means Solitude's next generation of leaders grow up more Cyrodiilic than Nordic. The vanished lighthouse keeper. Though the lighthouse itself was cut from the game as explorable content, NPC dialogue still occasionally references a lighthouse keeper position and the person who holds it. Periodically, guards or dock workers mention in passing that the lighthouse keeper hasn't been seen in weeks and someone should probably check on him soon. Following these dialogue hints leads nowhere productive, as no related quest actually exists in the game files. This creates an unresolved mystery hanging over Solitude that careful listeners notice. Players who investigate thoroughly never find satisfaction or closure, which some interpret as sloppy writing from incomplete removal of cut content, but others see as grimly realistic, acknowledging that not every concern gets addressed or resolved, especially during wartime when resources are stretched thin. The missing keeper becomes one of many casualties or unexplained disappearances that plague Skyrim's troubled times without investigation or justice. The Blue Palace's construction history. The Blue Palace wasn't always Solitude's seat of power and government. Historical books found in the city's library and Bard's College archives explain that it was constructed during the Second Era, replacing an earlier wooden fort that burned down during a violent succession crisis between rival claimants. The palace's distinctive blue-tinged stone was expensively imported from quarries in High Rock at enormous cost, demonstrating the wealth and ambition of the Jarl who commissioned the project. This choice of foreign materials sparked significant controversy among traditionalist Nords who viewed it as abandoning their heritage and embracing foreign influence. The palace's name derives directly from this characteristic blue stone, rather than any association with water, sky, or other symbolic meanings. Its construction marked a fundamental shift in Solitude's identity, from a purely military outpost to an administrative capital where politics, culture and diplomacy mattered as much as martial strength and military power. Sybille Stentor's vampiric nature. Sybille Stentor serves as court wizard to Jarl Elisif, but careful attention to her behavior, dialogue, and characteristics strongly suggests she's actually a vampire hiding in plain sight. She's never seen during daytime hours, always remaining deep in the palace's interior chambers away from windows. Her skin has an unnatural pallor, even for Skyrim's harsh climate. She possesses detailed knowledge of events from centuries ago that no normal person could remember firsthand. During vampire-related quests, she displays unusual sympathy for vampire interests. Most damningly, using vampire detection spells near her sometimes triggers indicators used for identifying undead. Despite these numerous clues, no quest ever directly addresses her true nature, suggesting either the character was intended for cut content or Bethesda enjoyed planting hints for observant players without providing answers. Elisif either doesn't know about Sybille's vampirism or tolerates it because her advisor's knowledge and magical power prove too valuable to lose. Castle Dour's training schedule. The courtyard at Castle Dour sees regular military drills that operate on a precise schedule most players never observe. At specific times each day, Legion soldiers gather for formation practice, weapons training, and ceremonial inspections. These drills continue consistently even if the player joins the Stormcloaks and the civil war gradually turns against the Empire, suggesting either stubborn military persistence or an oversight in quest scripting. The drills aren't mere background animations either. The soldiers actually follow proper training sequences, and officers bark realistic commands based on actual Roman military practice. This attention to detail reinforces that Castle Dour functions as an active military installation rather than merely a quest location. The Legion's discipline and structured organization contrast sharply with the Stormcloak's more irregular, militia-based approach to warfare. Watching these drills reveals why the Empire, despite being spread thin, remains a formidable military force. Elisif's questionable claim. Elisif's position as Jarl faces a peculiar legal complication that politically aware Thanes occasionally discuss quietly. Technically, she became Jarl through marriage to Torgig, who himself held the position after his father's death, following proper succession. With Torgig dead and no children produced from the marriage, Elisif's continued claim rests on questionable ground according to ancient Nordic law, which typically doesn't recognize authority passing through widowhood. The Empire backs her claim primarily because she's absolutely loyal, and installing a new Jarl might spark succession disputes or empower Stormcloak sympathizers. This legal ambiguity creates political vulnerability that Elisif's rivals could theoretically exploit. Her persistent efforts to appear strong and capable stem partly from compensating for this questioned legitimacy. Traditional Nords throughout Halfengar view her as merely an imperial puppet, while imperial officials see her as a useful but ultimately replaceable figurehead whose authority derives entirely from their support. The Sawmill's dark labor practices, Solitude Sawmill, visible from the city but technically located outside its walls, has a disturbing history of worker mistreatment that environmental storytelling subtly hints at. Suspicious bloodstains on the ground near the mill machinery suggest violence occurred there recently. Workers occasionally mention in dialogue accidents that happened to previous employees who complained about conditions. A hidden journal in the mill's office describes how the owners work employees to complete exhaustion, and those who protest publicly about dangerous conditions tend to mysteriously disappear shortly afterward. The implication is that the mill disposes of troublesome workers either through outright murder or by deliberately forcing them into dangerous situations that result in fatal accidents. This grimness reflects the harsh realities of Skyrim's working class, where life is cheap, employers face little accountability for mistreatment, and desperate people accept dangerous work because they have no alternatives. The Temple as political tool. The Temple of the Divines serves purposes beyond religious ones, functioning effectively as a tool of imperial soft power and cultural influence. Roland's sermons, when actually attended and carefully listened to, frequently emphasize obedience to legitimate authority, the sins of rebellion against rightful rulers, and the divine right of the Empire to govern. He frames the Stormcloak uprising in explicit religious terms as a violation of sacred oaths sworn before the gods. This political preaching is subtle enough that casual players miss it entirely, but it reveals how the Empire cynically uses religious institutions to manufacture popular consent for its rule. The temple's prominent position in Solitude's geography and its generous funding by the imperial government create a transactional relationship where the church legitimizes state power in exchange for material support, legal protection, and cultural prestige. This mirrors historical relationships between European churches and monarchies. Bairand's superior craftsmanship. Bairand's forge at Castle Dour produces weapons and armor for legion use, but the quality of his work raises interesting questions about his training background. Close examination of the equipment he produces reveals craftsmanship far superior to typical Skyrim smithing, incorporating specialized techniques common in Cyrodiilic workshops but rare in the provinces. Dialogue reveals that Beirand trained at the imperial city's prestigious Imperial Smithing Guild before taking his current position, studying under masters who served the Legion for generations. His forge contains specialized tools unavailable elsewhere in Skyrim, including an advanced quenching system using imported oils that improve steel's properties significantly. This expertise explains why the Legion maintains an exclusive contract with him rather than using cheaper local smiths. It also highlights how the Empire's institutional knowledge, educational systems, and resource distribution give it technological advantages over the Stormcloak's more improvised supply chains and traditional methods. The market's seasonal inventory. Solitude's outdoor market changes its available inventory based on seasons, something only long-term observation reveals to dedicated players. During winter months, vendors stock preserved foods, heavy, warm clothing, and firewood. Spring brings fresh produce, seeds for planting, and lighter garments. Summer sees exotic imports from trading ships, including rare alchemical ingredients and luxury goods. Autumn features harvest foods, hunting equipment, and preparations for the coming winter. These changes reflect an actual functioning economy responding to seasonal needs, rather than static game mechanics. Vendors discuss among themselves how seasonal variations affect their profits, with some specializing in particular times of year. This detail significantly contributes to Solitude feeling like a genuine living city with natural economic cycles, rather than a static video game environment where nothing ever truly changes. The market breathes with Skyrim seasons. The Bard's College secret entrance. The Bard's College building has a hidden entrance that students traditionally use for sneaking out after curfew to visit taverns or meet romantic partners. A loose wooden panel in the college's outer wall, accessible from a narrow alley, leads directly into the storage rooms on the ground floor. If you find and use this entrance, you'll trigger unique dialogue from college members who catch you, amusingly assuming you're a wayward student returning from unauthorized activities. The entrance was clearly designed for a quest that got cut during development, possibly involving helping or pranking college students in some comedy scenario. It remains fully functional in the final game, even though no quest ever directs you to it. Finding it requires thorough exploration of Solitude's back alleys and attention to environmental clues like scuff marks on walls indicating regular use and a worn path in the dirt. Pantaea's unfinished composition, Pantaea Atar, one of the Bard's College instructors, frequently mentions that she's working on an ambitious musical composition dedicated to capturing the essence and beauty of Solitude. She expresses frustration because she can't find the right melody to properly capture the city's character. This composition is never completed during the game's events, and no quest helps her finish it. Her ongoing struggle represents the artistic creative process's inherent difficulty and unpredictability. Other bards occasionally ask about her progress in ambient dialogue, and she always deflects, saying she's still seeking proper inspiration. This unfinished work serves as a metaphor for Solitude itself, a city trying to maintain beauty, culture, and civilization, while torn by war, political intrigue, and existential uncertainty. Pantaea's creative block mirrors the city's inability to fully realize its potential as Skyrim's cultural capital during these troubled times. The guard rotation system. Solitude's guards follow a remarkably complex rotation system that maintains constant patrols throughout the city. Individual guards work 12-hour shifts, with the roster cycling every few days to prevent fatigue and corruption. Careful observation reveals that guards change positions at specific times, walking back to the barracks for shift changes, while relief guards simultaneously take over their abandoned posts. This system, far more detailed than necessary for basic gameplay purposes, demonstrates Bethesda's commitment to creating a believable living city. The guards even have individual names and distinct personalities, occasionally referencing personal lives and relationships with other NPCs in their dialogue. Some guards are detectably more competent than others, with measurably different detection ranges and combat capabilities, adding another layer of individual variation to supposedly generic city guard NPCs. The Stormcloak spy paranoia, Imperial intelligence mentioned in scattered documents at Castle Dour, believes the Stormcloak spy operates somewhere within Solitude, secretly feeding information to Ulfric about troop movements and political decisions. General Tullius occasionally discusses this suspected infiltration with Legate Rika in private conversations, expressing frustration at being unable to identify the mole despite investigations. However, no questline ever allows players to actually uncover this supposed spy, and it remains forever unclear whether the spy genuinely exists or if Imperial paranoia simply sees threats where none exist. This ambiguity creates subtle tension in Solitude's atmosphere, where everyone potentially suspects their neighbors of treachery. Interestingly, if you join the Stormcloaks and participate in their intelligence gathering activities, you never interact with this supposed Solitude operative, which deepens rather than resolves the mystery surrounding their possible existence. The Dockworkers' informal union. Solitude's dockworkers have formed an informal union to collectively negotiate better conditions with the powerful East Empire Company, though the actual word union is never used in period-appropriate dialogue. Groups of dockworkers regularly meet in the Winking Skeever's back rooms to discuss collective action strategies, including coordinated work slowdowns when demands for higher pay aren't met by management. The company responds predictably with intimidation tactics, including hiring thugs to assault identified union leaders in dark alleys. This labor conflict plays out primarily in background dialogue and occasional violent encounters near the docks that seem random but aren't. It represents class struggle within Tamriel's essentially feudal economy, where workers have almost no formal power, but can still resist exploitation through solidarity and coordinated action. The conflict never reaches resolution during the game, continuing indefinitely without player involvement or meaningful impact on the storyline. The burning of King Olaf's dark history, Solitude's most famous historical event, the burning of King Olaf, is annually reenacted during a festival celebrated by the Bards College. However, the festival's current sanitized form conceals a much darker historical reality that most citizens don't know. The original ceremony involved burning King Olaf's actual body, not merely an effigy representing his defeat by Olaf One-Eye. Historical texts in the college's restricted library section reveal that earlier versions of this festival involved genuine human sacrifice, with criminals or prisoners of war burned alive inside the wicker effigy instead of simple straw. This horrifying practice continued well into the Third Era, before imperial authorities finally banned it as barbaric and uncivilized. Modern celebrations retain all the symbolism and pageantry, while completely abandoning the genuine brutality. The sanitized version allows Solitude to celebrate Nordic heritage while conforming to imperial sensibilities. The Blue Palace Catacombs. Beneath the Blue Palace lies an extensive network of passages and storage chambers that players only glimpse briefly during the Wolf Queen Awakened quest. These underground areas actually extend much further than the quest reveals, connecting to natural caverns within Solitude's stone arch foundation. Developers created extensive catacomb networks that remain completely unexplored in the final game, containing additional undead enemies, significant treasure, and lore books about Solitude's complete history. Data miners who've explored these cut areas found fully detailed environments with proper textures, lighting, and item placement that would have significantly expanded the questline. The decision to truncate this content likely came from pacing concerns, avoiding having players spend excessive time underground when the quest's focus was Pantaea. The unused areas remain intact in the game files, fully accessible through console commands or mods that unlock cut content. Captain Aldis's war experience. Captain Aldis, who commands Solitude's guard force with professional competence, is a decorated military veteran who served extensively in the Great War against the Aldmeri Dominion. His dialogue occasionally references this traumatic service, mentioning specific battles in Cyrodiil and the psychological trauma of watching the mighty Empire struggle desperately against Thalmor military superiority. This background completely explains his unwavering loyalty to the Empire, despite the controversial white gold concordat that many Nords despise. He views the Stormcloak Rebellion as a treasonous betrayal of those who died fighting the Dominion, believing Skyrim desperately needs Imperial unity to face inevitable future threats. His actual military experience also makes him exceptionally effective at maintaining order in Solitude, combining genuine combat prowess with administrative organizational skill. Several guards served under his command during the war, creating bonds of loyalty that strengthened the city's defenses considerably. The Winking Skeever's name story. The Winking Skeever's unusual and memorable name has a specific explanation that Corpulus Vinius shares with regular customers who ask. The tavern was named after his grandfather's peculiar pet skeever, a domesticated specimen trained to perform tricks for customers. The skeever suffered from a nervous condition causing one eye to spasm involuntarily, creating the distinct appearance of winking. This beloved pet became a minor local attraction, and when the grandfather opened his tavern decades ago, he commemorated the creature by naming the establishment the Winking Skeever and commissioning the distinctive sign featuring a skeever's face with one eye closed. The story is absurd enough that some customers think Corpulus invented it as marketing. but he maintains its complete truthfulness and can show old drawings of the original Skeever. Either way, the memorable name generates conversation and makes the tavern instantly recognizable. Aristocratic family connections. Many of Solitude's prominent families have extensive genealogies stretching back centuries, with detailed family trees carefully documented in the Blue Palace's archives. These records reveal extensive intermarriage among Solitude's elite, creating a complex web of kinship that invisibly influences politics and business. The Vici family, for instance, married into the Shattershield and Cruel Sea families of Windhelm over generations, creating economic alliances that persist across the Civil War's ideological divide. This aristocratic network operates somewhat above politics, with family loyalty sometimes quietly trumping allegiance to Jarl or Empire. Understanding these hidden connections explains certain characters' seemingly contradictory behavior and reveals the true complexity of Solitude's power structure. Common citizens remain completely outside this network, facing nearly insurmountable barriers to social mobility that maintain class stratification across generations. The harbour expansion plans. Documents stored in the East Empire Company warehouse describe detailed plans for significantly expanding Solitude's harbour to accommodate larger ships and dramatically increase trade volume. The ambitious project has stalled indefinitely due to the Civil War, diverting essential resources and available labour to military needs. Architectural plans show a proposed second pier with modern docking facilities, significantly enlarged warehouse facilities, and improved cargo handling systems. The company argues the expansion would economically benefit all Solitude through increased trade, while critics claim it primarily serves corporate interests and would disrupt traditional fishing grounds used by common folk for generations. This debate reflects ongoing tension between economic development and traditional livelihoods, a conflict playing out across Skyrim as the province gradually modernizes. The expansion never actually happens during the game, remaining a theoretical future possibility that may never materialize. Fihada's secret romance. Fihada, Bairand's capable assistant Fletcher, is conducting a secret relationship with a wealthy merchant's daughter, whose family considers him far beneath their social station. They meet clandestinely in various locations around Solitude, desperately trying to avoid detection by her disapproving family. If you observe the city's NPCs carefully across different times and locations, you'll occasionally spot them together in quiet corners, having brief whispered conversations before quickly separating. Fihada's dialogue never explicitly mentions the relationship, maintaining the secret, but letters carefully hidden in his room describe specific meeting times and express genuine affection. The merchant father strongly suspects the relationship and has directly warned Fihada away, threatening economic consequences and possibly violence if the romance continues. This subplot never develops into an actual quest, existing purely as background texture showing that NPCs have complex lives completely independent of player involvement. The empty High King's throne. The High King's throne in the Blue Palace's main hall sits permanently empty, a constant physical reminder of Torgig's assassination and the political crisis his death created. Elisif sits on the smaller Jarl's throne positioned beside it, never presuming to occupy her deceased husband's seat. This deliberate arrangement symbolizes her complicated political situation. wielding local Jarl authority, but unable to claim the kingship. Some courtiers quietly discuss whether she should destroy or remove the High King's throne to move forward, but she absolutely refuses, maintaining it as a memorial. The throne's continued emptiness has become an unofficial pilgrimage site for Torgig supporters, who leave small offerings of flowers and candles at its base. This transforms a piece of furniture into a powerful political symbol, representing both profound loss and contested legitimacy in visible form. The Lighthouse beacon system. Though the lighthouse isn't accessible to players, examining it carefully from various angles and distances reveals it uses a traditional fire-based beacon rather than a magical light source. This practical detail demonstrates realistic limitations on magic in Skyrim's economy. While skilled mages could theoretically create permanent magical light enchantments, the prohibitive cost exceeds most practical civilian applications. Fire beacons, maintained by burning oil or wood, provide a much cheaper and more reliable alternative. The lighthouse keeper's job, had it been included, would have involved ensuring the beacon never went dark through the night, hauling heavy fuel up the tower's spiral stairs, and carefully maintaining the reflective surfaces that amplified the flame's reach. This mundane explanation for a seemingly magical structure effectively grounds Skyrim's fantasy world in realistic economic and technical constraints that govern how magic is actually used. Market vendor rivalry. The market stalls in Solitude's main courtyard operate in fierce competition despite their physical proximity. Vendors actively undercut each other's prices to steal customers, poach dissatisfied clients, and spread malicious rumors about competitors' goods. This economic rivalry creates palpable tension that occasionally erupts into loud public arguments. Greta, who sells fruits and vegetables, has a particularly bitter ongoing feud with the fishmonger, loudly claiming his spoiled wares smell so terrible they actively drive customers away from her adjacent stall. These personal disputes add authentic life to the marketplace, showing that merchants are real people with genuine conflicts rather than mere shopping interfaces. The Jarl's guards occasionally have to physically intervene to prevent altercations from becoming violent, enforcing basic order in commercial spaces. The execution block's ancient history. The execution block where Rogvir meets his death has been in continuous use for over 200 years, with countless generations of condemned prisoners meeting their end on its blood-stained surface. Guards who discuss executions mention that the block is carved from a single massive piece of ancient stone, supposedly blessed by priests to ensure clean executions that honor the condemned's final moments. The block's age and grim history give it ceremonial significance that extends beyond its practical function. Some superstitious citizens believe that the tortured spirits of the executed linger near the block, and individuals sensitive to supernatural presence report feeling watched when passing by at night. This folklore adds a supernatural dimension to an otherwise mundane object. The block has witnessed so much death it's become spiritually significant. The Bard's College curriculum dispute. The Bard's College faculty engage in ongoing debates about curriculum philosophy, with some instructors favouring traditional Nordic songs and oral traditions, while others push for incorporating imperial musical theory and written composition. This seemingly academic dispute actually mirrors Skyrim's broader cultural conflict between preserving Nordic identity and embracing imperial cultural influence. Giraud Gemene represents the imperial modernizing faction, having studied extensively in Cyrodiil and advocating for theoretical rigor. Inge Sixfingers champions Nordic tradition, teaching ancient folk songs passed down through oral tradition for centuries. Their fundamental disagreement occasionally becomes heated during faculty meetings, with students caught uncomfortably between competing philosophies. This academic conflict never reaches outright crisis, but it creates ongoing tension within the college, reflecting larger unanswered questions about Skyrim's cultural future under imperial influence. The temple's hidden crypt. Beneath the Temple of the Divines lies an extensive crypt housing the physical remains of Solitude's previous rulers and notable citizens throughout history. This crypt is mentioned in priest dialogue, but never shown to players or made accessible. Priests describe it reverently as sacred space where the worthy dead rest peacefully until the gods call them to Sovngarde or other afterlives. The crypt supposedly contains significant treasures buried with the deceased, including ancient weapons and armor of historical significance, making it a tempting target for grave robbers. However, religious prohibitions and the crypt's location under constant priestly guard make theft nearly impossible. The crypt's existence adds considerable depth to Solitude's history, suggesting many generations of accumulated dead resting beneath the city's busy streets. Company script exploitation. The East Empire Company pays dock workers partially in company script, a private currency redeemable only at company-owned stores where prices are deliberately inflated above market rates. This exploitative system effectively traps workers in perpetual debt, as their script wages never quite cover their basic expenses, forcing them to borrow additional money from the company at usurious interest rates. Workers discuss this exploitation bitterly in taverns, expressing frustration but feeling completely powerless to change the system without collective action. The company justifies script by arguing it protects workers from supposedly wasting wages on alcohol and gambling, cynically framing naked exploitation as paternalistic concern for worker welfare. This economic arrangement directly mirrors historical company towns, where employers controlled workers' entire lives through monetary manipulation and artificial economic systems. The Blue Palace's architectural influence. The Blue Palace's distinctive and expensive architecture has influenced building styles throughout all of Huffinger Hold, with local jarls and wealthy merchants commissioning structures that deliberately imitate its features. Buildings throughout Solitude and surrounding settlements incorporate blue stone accents, decorative arches, and other design elements directly copied from the palace. This architectural influence represents cultural power, with the ruling class's aesthetic preferences gradually spreading throughout the entire region. However, these imitation buildings use painted wood rather than genuine imported blue stone, creating superficial resemblance without actual substance or quality. This distinction between authentic, expensive materials and cheap imitation becomes an important class marker, allowing the truly wealthy to demonstrate their superior status through costly materials, while lesser nobles make do with mere appearances. Castle Dour's secret meetings. In Castle Dour's courtyard, very late at night when most NPCs are sleeping in their homes, Imperial officers occasionally hold secret meetings discussing strategies and concerns they won't share publicly or in official reports. These clandestine meetings can be accidentally stumbled upon if you're exploring the area at odd hours, though the officers won't acknowledge your intrusive presence beyond generic greetings. Their hushed conversations reveal serious doubts about the Civil War's likely outcome, growing concerns about overstretched supply lines, and surprisingly frank assessments of various Legion commanders' actual competence. These brutally honest private discussions contrast sharply with the confident public face the Empire presents to maintain troop morale, showing that military leaders privately understand the war's serious challenges even while maintaining optimistic rhetoric for the rank and file. The scattered children's toys. Throughout Solitude streets and alleys, perceptive players notice toys left in various locations. A wooden practice sword near the market square, a handmade doll by the temple steps, a leather ball in a narrow alley. These objects strongly suggest children's active presence despite the notable lack of child NPCs in most areas. The toys serve as environmental storytelling, cleverly indicating that children do exist throughout Solitude, but simply aren't represented in the game engine due to technical limitations and content concerns about including children in a game featuring significant violence. The developers chose to suggest children's existence through carefully placed props, rather than include child NPCs beyond an absolute minimum. This approach maintains the illusion of a fully populated city while avoiding potentially controversial scenarios. Hall of the Dead hauntings. The Hall of the Dead, while primarily serving functional purposes for managing corpses and conducting burial preparations, has developed a significant reputation for supernatural activity. Styr occasionally mentions seeing ghosts of the recently deceased wandering the halls late at night, though he publicly attributes these sightings to tricks of light and shadow. However, if you visit the Hall of the Dead at exactly midnight game time, there's a chance spectral figures will briefly appear among the crypts. These ghosts don't attack or interact with players, simply manifesting for a few seconds before fading back into nothing. Some players report never seeing them across hundreds of hours, suggesting the spawns are extremely rare random events. The ghosts add appropriate gothic atmosphere to Solitude, reinforcing themes of death and loss. The Winking Skeever's criminal meeting room. Behind a false panel in the Winking Skeever's storage area lies a small hidden room, used specifically for private meetings between criminals and corrupt officials seeking complete discretion. Corpulus Vinius rents this space at premium rates to those seeking secrecy, claiming complete ignorance of what actually transpires there to maintain plausible deniability. The room contains a sturdy table, several chairs, and surprisingly sophisticated soundproofing enchantments that prevent any eavesdropping. Players can discover this room through extremely careful exploration, finding evidence of various illicit deals conducted there. However, no quest actually involves the space, and you never encounter it being actively used. Its existence suggests Solitude's criminal underworld operates far more extensively than the handful of quests reveal. The Penitus Oculatus network. Members of the Penitus Oculatus, the Emperor's elite secret intelligence service, operate constantly throughout Solitude, despite most citizens being completely unaware of their presence. These highly trained agents dress as common citizens and blend seamlessly into crowds while monitoring for threats against Imperial interests. Commander Maro, who appears during the Dark Brotherhood questline, leads this covert network from his headquarters in nearby Dragonbridge. His agents in Solitude continuously report on political sentiments, watch for potential assassins, and investigate security threats. After the Emperor's shocking assassination, these agents conduct an extensive investigation, interviewing NPCs and searching for evidence. Their constant presence demonstrates that the Empire maintains sophisticated surveillance networks even in supposedly friendly cities, suggesting a police state. Defensive urban planning. Solitude's buildings are arranged not just aesthetically, but strategically for defensive purposes. The narrow, winding streets create natural choke points where small defending forces can effectively hold against much larger attacking armies. Buildings are deliberately positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire for archers positioned on rooftops. The city's single main entrance becomes a fatal funnel for attackers who can be slaughtered in confined space. These defensive considerations reflect that Solitude, despite its current role as administrative capital, was originally designed and built as a military stronghold. The city's original architect clearly understood siege warfare principles, creating a layout that cleverly leverages the natural stone arch's defensive advantages while systematically minimizing potential weaknesses. This military heritage significantly influences daily civilian life, with some residents complaining that the narrow streets make moving goods and carts extremely difficult. The rejected apprentice. A young would-be apprentice smith sometimes appears in Solitude streets. Watching Bairand's forge work from a respectful distance and hoping desperately to learn from the acknowledged master craftsman. This youth approaches Beirand repeatedly, but is always firmly rebuffed. Beirand refuses to take apprentices, explaining that his demanding legion contract keeps him far too busy for teaching responsibilities. The persistent apprentice represents countless young people throughout Skyrim seeking opportunities for advancement, but facing insurmountable barriers. Without proper mentorship, these aspiring craftspeople struggle to develop their skills beyond basic competence, perpetuating economic inequality across generations. The apprentice eventually stops appearing, presumably having finally given up or somehow found other opportunities elsewhere. This minor personal tragedy plays out completely without player involvement or even acknowledgement. Solitude's existential threat. Solitude's greatest and most carefully guarded secret lies literally in its foundation. The natural stone arch supporting the entire city is slowly but inevitably eroding due to constant exposure to harsh weather and sea spray. Confidential geological surveys suggest the arch could potentially collapse within a century, though the timeline is uncertain. City engineers and senior officials know this, but deliberately keep it quiet to prevent economic panic and disaster. Ongoing reinforcement efforts continue quietly, but ultimately, Solitude may eventually need to abandon its dramatic perch entirely and rebuild elsewhere on solid ground. This existential threat hangs perpetually over the city, known only to a trusted few. It adds poignancy to Solitude's beauty, suggesting that even Skyrim's greatest and most impressive cities are ultimately temporary, subject to natural forces beyond any mortal control. The dock inspector's corruption. A dock inspector employed by the city to ensure fair trade practices and collect tariffs is deeply corrupt, accepting regular bribes from the East Empire Company to ignore violations and underreport cargo volumes. This corruption allows the company to avoid substantial tax payments that should fund city services. The inspector's comfortable lifestyle and expensive possessions suggest income far beyond his modest official salary. Dock workers know about the corruption, but fear retaliation if they report it. The arrangement represents systemic corruption, where those with power and money can simply buy exemption from rules that burden common folk. No quest addresses this corruption, and the inspector operates with complete impunity throughout the game. The temple's golden candlesticks. The Temple of the Divines possesses a set of incredibly valuable golden candlesticks that are only displayed during the most important religious festivals. These candlesticks are ancient artifacts supposedly blessed by Saint Alessia herself during the First Era. They're kept locked in the temple's treasury the rest of the year due to their immense value and historical significance. Roland occasionally mentions them when discussing the temple's treasures. The candlesticks represent Solitude's wealth and the temple's political importance. Stealing them would be an enormous crime carrying death penalty, which presumably explains why no thief has succeeded, despite the obvious temptation. The Bard's College's practice rooms. The Bard's College contains individual practice rooms where students rehearse their music and poetry without disturbing others. These soundproofed rooms are mentioned in student dialogue, but never shown to players. Students complain about having to schedule practice time and competing for the best rooms with superior acoustics. The practice rooms would have provided interesting environmental storytelling showing student life, but they were likely cut for space and performance reasons. Their existence in lore helps explain how the college functions as an actual educational institution rather than just a quest location. Evette's family history. Evette's family has farmed the land outside Solitude for 4 generations, but she's the first to try selling produce directly in the city market, rather than through middlemen. This entrepreneurial attempt is failing due to established merchants using their political connections to disadvantage her. Her grandfather's journal, if you could read it, would describe how the family gradually lost land to wealthy buyers over generations. Evette represents the last generation trying to maintain independence before being forced into wage labor. Her struggle illustrates Skyrim's economic changes as traditional farming gives way to merchant capitalism. The guard captain's daily routine. Captain Aldis follows a precise daily routine that never varies unless quests interrupt it. He inspects guards at dawn, reviews reports mid-morning, patrols personally at midday, holds training sessions in afternoon, and reviews the next day's assignments at evening. This rigid schedule reflects military discipline and helps explain why Solitude security remains effective. Guards know exactly when and where to find him if problems arise. His predictability could theoretically be exploited by criminals, but none seem organized enough to try. Observing his routine provides insight into how military discipline structures daily life. Sybille Stentor's research. Sybille Stentor conducts magical research in her tower, focusing on necromancy and soul manipulation. Her research materials suggest she's trying to achieve lichdom, or another form of immortality beyond vampirism. Books in her quarters discuss ancient slowed necromancy, Manimarco's teachings, and ideal masters of the soul cairn. She's clearly pursuing forbidden knowledge that would horrify most citizens if they knew. Her research explains why she tolerates Pantaea's presence rather than immediately alerting authorities. Sybille views Pantaea as a potential source of knowledge about undeath. Her ultimate goals remain mysterious. The missing warehouse inventory. East Empire Company warehouses contain far less inventory than shipping manifests indicate should be present. The discrepancy suggests massive theft occurring systematically over time. Company officials either don't notice or are complicit in the theft. Dock workers quietly steal small amounts they can personally use or sell, while larger thefts require inside help. This represents endemic corruption in Solitude's economy, where everyone takes their cut. The company's profits are large enough to absorb these losses, so they don't investigate aggressively. The theft operates as an informal wage supplement for poorly paid workers. Roland's secret Talos worship. Despite publicly enforcing the Talos ban, Roland privately maintains a small Talos shrine in his quarters, hidden behind a false panel. He conducts personal prayers to Talos late at night when no one can observe. This secret worship represents his attempt to reconcile religious conviction with professional duty. If discovered, he would lose his position and possibly face criminal charges. His hypocrisy is understandable given the impossible situation the White Gold Concordat created. Many faithful Nords likely maintain similar secret shrines, publicly complying while privately preserving their true beliefs. The Fletchers failed love. Fihada's secret romance with the merchant's daughter ultimately ends badly, though this happens off-screen. Eventually, the merchant discovers the relationship and threatens Fihada violently. Fihada reluctantly ends the relationship to protect her from her father's wrath. Afterward, he becomes noticeably more withdrawn and focuses obsessively on work. His paintings become darker in tone. The failed romance represents how class barriers destroy relationships and happiness in Solitude's stratified society. This storyline plays out through subtle changes in behavior rather than explicit dialogue or quests. Castle Dour's stockpile. Castle Dour maintains massive stockpiles of weapons, armor, and supplies in underground storage. These supplies could sustain a prolonged siege, showing Imperial defensive preparations. The stockpile exists in lore but isn't accessible to players. Legion quartermasters carefully inventory the supplies monthly. The stockpile represents Imperial thoroughness and long-term strategic planning. Even if supply lines were cut, Castle Dour could hold out for months. This preparation suggests Imperial military competence despite their struggles in the Civil War. Jala's eventual marriage. Jala eventually marries someone other than Captain Aldis, accepting a proposal from a dock worker closer to her social class. This happens off-screen if enough time passes. She gives up on her unrequited crush and chooses practical security over romantic fantasy. The marriage is loveless but economically beneficial. This represents how most marriages in Solitude's lower classes are economic arrangements rather than love matches. Jala's story illustrates the limited choices available to working-class women in Skyrim's patriarchal society. The Temple Choir. The Temple of the Divines has a choir that performs during weekly services, mentioned in dialogue but never shown. Choir members are volunteers from Solitude's population who practice on specific evenings. The choir performs traditional hymns to the divines in ancient Cyrodiilic. Joining the choir is considered prestigious and provides social connections. The choir director is extremely demanding and frequently criticizes members' performances. The choir represents Solitude's attempt to maintain high culture and religious tradition despite wartime disruptions. Bairand's retirement plans. Bairand plans to retire within a few years and return to Cyrodiil to live with his daughter. He's been saving money carefully to afford the journey and establish himself there. He occasionally mentions these plans to regular customers. His retirement would leave the Legion without their best smith, potentially affecting military capabilities. Beirand represents aging workers looking forward to rest after decades of labor. His plans suggest life continuing beyond the game's events, with NPCs having futures that players never see. The Sawmill strike threat. Sawmill workers periodically threaten strikes to demand better conditions and wages. These threats are mentioned in dialogue, but never materialize into actual work stoppages. The threats alone sometimes win small concessions from management. Guard presence increases near the sawmill when strike talk intensifies. The strike threats represent worker organizing and resistance to exploitation. Management uses divide and conquer tactics to prevent unified action. The ongoing labor tension adds realism to Solitude's economy. Market day changes. Solitude's market operates on different schedules for different days. Certain vendors only appear on specific days, creating market day variations. Local farmers bring fresh produce on specific days, matching harvest schedules. This creates actual economic rhythms rather than static merchant availability. Observant players can learn these schedules and plan shopping accordingly. The varied schedule makes the market feel more alive and realistic. It rewards player attention to environmental details and patterns. The palace's food supply. The Blue Palace consumes enormous quantities of food daily to feed the Jarl's household and servants. Supply wagons arrive regularly from farms throughout Harfinger Hold. The palace's kitchens operate constantly, preparing meals for different times and different social classes within the household. Kitchen staff complain about demanding nobles and impossible standards. The food supply logistics illustrate the palace as a functioning household rather than just a quest location. Supply disruptions would quickly affect the palace despite its apparent invulnerability. Falk Firebeard's marriage. Falk Firebeard was married a year ago, but his wife died from disease. He never remarried, dedicating himself entirely to serving Solitude. A small portrait of her remains in his quarters. He occasionally visits her grave in the Hall of the Dead. This personal tragedy explains his serious demeanor and workaholic tendencies. Falk represents many NPCs, carrying hidden grief and loss. His dedication to duty helps him cope with personal pain by maintaining focus on serving others. The Dockmaster's ledger. The Dockmaster maintains detailed ledgers recording every ship arrival and departure, cargo manifests, and passenger lists. These records theoretically help track trade and identify smuggling. In practice, the Dockmaster accepts bribes to alter records or omit entries. His ledgers are simultaneously official documents and works of creative fiction. The deliberately inaccurate records frustrate Imperial attempts to actually understand Solitude's trade economy. The ledgers represent how corruption undermines administrative systems despite good intentions. Radiant Raiment's debt. Despite their upscale image, Radiant Raiment carries substantial debt to creditors in Cyrodiil. The sisters struggle to maintain their expensive inventory and shop appearance. They project wealth while actually facing financial pressure. This explains their aggressive sales tactics and high prices. Their debt represents the precarious finances of many supposedly successful merchants. One major setback could bankrupt them completely. They maintain appearances desperately to avoid losing wealthy customers. Atar's philosophy. Atar has developed a personal philosophy about death and justice from his experiences as executioner. He believes swift, clean death is mercy compared to imprisonment or torture. He views his role as necessary but doesn't take pleasure in it. He treats condemned prisoners with professional respect. His philosophy helps him cope with the psychological burden of his work. Atar represents how people rationalize difficult professions through ethical frameworks. His views on death are surprisingly nuanced for his grim role. The Temple School. The Temple of the Divines operates a small school teaching children basic literacy and religious education. This school is mentioned in dialogue, but never shown. Parents appreciate the free education despite its religious focus. The school helps maintain literacy rates in Solitude. Temple education also indoctrinates children in imperial religious views from young ages. The school represents how religious institutions provide social services while advancing their interests. Guard training methods. New guards undergo weeks of training before assuming patrol duties. Training focuses on crowd control, arrest procedures, and basic combat. Veterans teach recruits through demonstrations and supervise patrols. The training ensures Solitude's guards maintain professional standards. Poor performers are dismissed before completing training. This training system explains why Solitude's guards seem more competent than those in other holds. Their professionalism reflects systematic training rather than individual talent. The blacksmith's apprentices. Beirand occasionally trains temporary apprentices who help with basic tasks while learning smithing. These apprentices never appear as NPCs, but are mentioned in dialogue. They typically leave after several months to establish their own forges elsewhere. Bairand's training helps spread improved smithing techniques throughout Skyrim. The apprentice system represents medieval craft guilds and knowledge transmission. Bairand's refusal to take permanent apprentices suggests he prefers temporary relationships. Solitude's water system. Solitude has a sophisticated water system, bringing fresh water from mountain springs through underground aqueducts. The system requires constant maintenance to prevent contamination. City workers clear debris from intake points and repair leaks. The water system represents Roman-style engineering adapted to Skyrim's climate. Clean water access gives Solitude health advantages over other settlements. The system's existence suggests earlier, more advanced civilization built the foundations. The college library. The Bard's College maintains an extensive library containing rare books about Nordic history and culture. The library is mentioned but never accessible to players. Students research there for their studies. The head librarian strictly enforces rules about book care and quiet. The library represents preserved cultural knowledge and institutional memory. Its contents would be invaluable for understanding Nordic traditions before imperial influence. Market thief problem. Solitude's market suffers from persistent theft despite guard presence. Skilled pickpockets work the crowded areas during busy periods. Guards catch some thieves, but others evade capture. Merchants increase prices to compensate for theft losses, creating a cycle where honest customers pay for criminals' actions. The theft problem represents urban crime that authorities cannot completely eliminate. Guards prioritize serious crimes over petty theft due to limited resources. The harbour's history. Solitude's harbour was significantly smaller in earlier eras before expansion during the Third Era. Old dock foundations visible underwater show the original harbour size. The expansion enabled increased trade that enriched Solitude. Harbour workers occasionally find artifacts from ancient ships in harbour sediment. The harbour's growth reflects Solitude's rising importance in Skyrim's economy. Future expansions could continue this historical pattern. Temple funding. The Temple of the Divines receives substantial funding from both the city and the imperial government. This dual funding creates competing obligations and pressures. Roland must balance serving genuine worshippers while satisfying political sponsors. Temple finances explain its impressive size and maintenance. The funding arrangement ties the temple directly to imperial interests. Financial dependence ensures the temple supports empire policies. Castledoor's dungeon. Castledoor contains a dungeon holding prisoners awaiting trial or execution. The dungeon is mentioned but never accessible. Conditions are reportedly harsh, but not deliberately cruel. Guards sometimes torture prisoners for information during interrogations. The dungeon represents state power to imprison and punish. Its hidden nature allows authorities to abuse prisoners without public oversight. The Winking Skeever's recipes. The Winking Skeever's success partly depends on Corpulus Vinius's secret recipes passed down through his family. These recipes use specific spice combinations unavailable to competitors. Corpulus guards these recipes jealously and refuses to share them. His food quality keeps customers returning despite competition. The secret recipes represent family business advantages and protected knowledge. Losing the recipes would significantly harm the tavern's appeal. Dock worker injuries. Dock workers suffer frequent injuries from dangerous working conditions and heavy cargo. The East Empire Company provides minimal medical care and no compensation for permanent injuries. Injured workers unable to work lose their jobs and face poverty. This callousness toward worker safety represents industrial capitalism's human costs. Workers accept dangerous conditions because alternative employment is scarce. Elisif's political education. Elisif receives ongoing political education from advisors teaching her statecraft and diplomacy. She's younger and less experienced than many assume. Her dependence on advisors reflects her limited political preparation before becoming Jarl. Elisif studies late into night trying to learn her role. Her education represents aristocrats' preparation for power. Despite her limitations, she's genuinely trying to serve Solitude well. The temple's artifacts. Besides the golden candlesticks, the temple houses other religious artifacts, including saint relics and ancient texts. These artifacts are kept in secure treasury areas. Roland occasionally allows scholars to study specific artifacts under supervision. The artifact's presence makes the temple a pilgrimage destination for devout worshippers. Their historical value is immense beyond mere monetary worth. Market regulations. Solitude enforces strict market regulations about stall locations, hours, and product standards. Merchants must purchase expensive licenses from the city. Regulations favor established merchants over newcomers. Guards enforce regulations selectively, accepting bribes to overlook violations. The regulatory system generates city revenue, while creating corruption opportunities. Regulations theoretically protect consumers, but actually protect incumbent merchants from competition. The Bard's Festival. The Bard's College hosts an annual festival featuring performances by students and visiting bards. The festival is mentioned in dialogue but never occurs during the game. The festival attracts visitors throughout Skyrim and beyond. Preparations consume months of planning and practice. The festival represents Nordic cultural traditions maintained despite imperial influence. Falk's intelligence network. Falk maintains a network of informants, providing intelligence about potential threats to Solitude. These informants include merchants, servants, and travelers passing through. Falk pays for useful information and protects informant identities. His intelligence network operates completely hidden from public knowledge. The network helps explain how Falk seems to know everything happening in Solitude. The Lighthouse Keeper's successor. If the Lighthouse Keeper truly vanished, someone must eventually replace him to maintain the lighthouse. The succession process would involve the Jarl appointing a new keeper. Finding qualified candidates willing to accept isolated lighthouse duty proves difficult. The lighthouse's operation is crucial for harbour safety. The keeper position's difficulty reflect challenges maintaining infrastructure during war. Castle Dour's Armoury. Castle Dour's armoury contains weapons and armour for equipping Legion soldiers. The armoury is guarded constantly and carefully inventoried. Weapons are maintained in ready condition for immediate deployment. The armoury's contents represent significant military resources that would interest thieves or stormcloaks. Security measures prevent unauthorized access. The armoury's existence shows imperial military preparedness. Temple marriage ceremonies. The temple conducts marriage ceremonies for Solitude citizens of appropriate social status. Roland performs ceremonies according to imperial religious traditions. Common citizens often cannot afford temple ceremonies and marry through simpler methods. Temple weddings carry prestige and social recognition. The ceremony's exclusivity reinforces class distinctions. Marriages represent important social and economic alliances. The market's black market. Beyond legal market stalls, a black market operates in Solitude's alleys and private rooms. This black market trades in stolen goods, smuggled items, and illegal substances. Guards know about the black market but lack resources to eliminate it completely. Occasional crackdowns temporarily disrupt but never destroy the black market. The black market's persistence shows limits of law enforcement. Bairand's supply chain. Bairand sources materials from specific mines and suppliers throughout Skyrim. He maintains careful relationships with these suppliers to ensure quality and reliability. Supply disruptions due to civil war threaten his ability to fulfill contracts. Bairand's supply chain represents complex economic networks underlying Skyrim's economy. His success depends on maintaining these relationships. The Hall's expansion. The Hall of the Dead needs expansion due to increasing deaths from civil war. Styr has petitioned the Jarl for funds to excavate additional catacombs. The expansion is approved, but funding hasn't been allocated. Styr's frustration reflects how war strains public services. The needed expansion demonstrates war's human costs through infrastructure strain. Radiant Raiment's competition. Radiant Raiment faces competition from traveling merchants selling clothing at lower prices. The sisters cannot match these prices due to their overhead costs. They emphasize quality and exclusivity to justify premium pricing. Competition threatens their business model long term. Their struggle represents tensions between established merchants and mobile competitors. Guard morale. Guard morale fluctuates based on civil war developments and personal factors. Recent defeats lower morale while victories raise it. Captain Aldis works to maintain morale through leadership and small privileges. Low morale affects guard performance and reliability. Morale represents human factors in military and police effectiveness. The Temple's charitable works. The Temple provides charity to Solitude's poorest citizens, including food distribution and shelter. These charitable works are mentioned but not shown. Charity reinforces the Temple's social legitimacy and popular support. The scale of charity is limited by available resources. Charity also serves political purposes by reducing unrest among the desperate. Evette-san's determination. Despite constant struggles, Evette-san refuses to give up her market stall. Her determination represents working-class resilience and stubbornness. She adapts by reducing costs and finding new suppliers. Her persistence inspires other struggling merchants. Evette's character shows how ordinary people endure extraordinary hardships. Castle Dour's strategic importance. Castle Dour's position makes it crucial for controlling Solitude and Harfingar hold. Losing Castle Dour would effectively mean losing Solitude to Stormcloaks. Imperial forces concentrate their best troops and supplies there. The castle's importance explains the significant military resources committed to its defense. Its strategic value exceeds its immediate military utility. The Sawmill's ownership. The Sawmill is owned by a wealthy merchant family that inherited it through generations. Current owners rarely visit, leaving day-to-day operations to managers. This absentee ownership contributes to poor working conditions. Workers resent enriching owners who never face the dangers. The ownership structure represents economic inequality and class exploitation. Sybille's age. Sybille Stentor has served as court wizard for decades, far longer than her apparent age suggests. Her longevity hints at vampirism or other life extension magic. Other palace staff have grown old, while Sybille remains unchanged. Her sustained service provides institutional knowledge and continuity. Her age raises questions nobody dares ask publicly. The market's history. Solitude's market has operated in its current location for centuries. The market square's paving stones are ancient and worn from countless transactions. Market traditions passed through generations shape current practices. The market represents economic continuity through political changes. Its persistence shows the economy's fundamental importance, transcending politics. Solitude's future. Solitude's future remains uncertain, depending on civil war outcomes. Imperial victory would maintain current power structures. Stormcloak victory would fundamentally transform the city's politics and culture. Either outcome faces challenges from the Aldmeri Dominion's continuing threat. Solitude will continue as an important city regardless of political changes. Its geographic position and established infrastructure ensure long-term importance. Thank you for journeying with me tonight, Cozy Knight. If this story helped you rest, consider leaving a like. It helps other weary travelers find their way to our fireside. And remember, there are many more tales waiting for you here by the fire. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next adventure. Until next time, sleep peacefully and have a cozy night. The missing lighthouse. Eagle-eyed, explorers notice something peculiar about Solitude's harbour. There's a lighthouse visible from certain angles near the docks, but you can never actually reach it or interact with it. This lighthouse was originally intended to be a fully explorable location in early development builds. Data miners discovered unused interior cells labelled Solitude lighthouse interior that would have contained a small living quarters for the lighthouse keeper and a spiraling staircase to the beacon room. The quest line associated with it involved helping a retired ship captain who maintained the light, but the entire sequence was cut before release, leaving only the exterior model as a distant landmark. Elisif's hidden grief, the Jarl of Solitude, Elisif the Fair, displays outward composure following her husband Torgig's assassination, but environmental storytelling reveals her private anguish. In her personal quarters within the Blue Palace, you'll find a locked chest that can only be opened with extremely high lockpicking skills. Inside sits a collection of Torgig's personal effects, his favourite drinking horn, love letters he wrote during their courtship, and a simple iron ring that was his first gift to her before he became High King. Most players never see these items because the chest is tucked away in a corner and the lock difficulty deters casual inspection. These objects humanize Elisif beyond her political role. The Bard's College Bell Tower. The Bard's College features a prominent bell tower that chimes at specific in-game times. But what few players discover is that you can actually climb to the bell chamber. A hidden ladder on the building's exterior leads to a small platform where you can ring the bell manually. If you ring it exactly 7 times at midnight, a ghostly apparition briefly appears on the college grounds. This ghost is believed to be Giraud Germain's predecessor as headmaster, who allegedly died in a suspicious fall from this very tower decades before the game's events. The game files identify this spectre as Bard Ghost 01, but it only appears during this specific trigger, the Emperor's private dock. When Emperor Titus Mede II arrives in Solitude during the Dark Brotherhood questline, his ship docks at a special pier that's normally inaccessible to players. This dock was constructed specifically for royal visits and features imperial standards, purple banners and marble posts that contrast sharply with the weathered wood of common merchant piers. After the related questline concludes, this dock remains permanently blocked by invisible barriers, but if you use console commands or glitches to access it, you'll find that several Imperial Legion soldiers stand guard there indefinitely, even after the Emperor's death. They cycle through ambient dialogue discussing rumours about the assassination. Vittoria Vici's wedding setup. The wedding ceremony that Dark Brotherhood players interrupt took weeks of in-game preparation that most never witness. If you visit Solitude repeatedly in the days before the ceremony, you'll notice workers gradually decorating the courtyard near the temple. Flower arrangements appear in stages, banners get hung, and food tables get positioned. NPCs discuss the upcoming celebration with increasing frequency. This attention to detail creates a living city atmosphere. The wedding planner, who can be overheard giving instructions to servants, has unique dialogue that changes each day as the event approaches. After the assassination occurs, these same NPCs express genuine shock and grief, with some refusing to clean up the decorations for several days. The Pelagius Wing secret. The Pelagius Wing of the Blue Palace, where you enter Pelagius the Mad's mind during a Daedric quest, contains a hidden room that exists in the real world, but not in the mental landscape. Behind a false wall in the southeastern corner, accessible only through no-clip commands, sits a small chamber containing Pelagius's actual personal effects. There's a journal describing his descent into madness, toys from his childhood, and disturbing paintings he created during his rule. the developers clearly intended this space to provide context for the quest, but ultimately moved the exposition into the dream sequence itself. The room remains fully detailed and lit, suggesting it was cut late in development. Solitude's sewer system. Beneath the city streets runs an elaborate sewer network that players only glimpse during the fleeing from execution sequence. These sewers connect every major building in Solitude through maintenance tunnels, providing a secondary transportation network for workers and waste removal. If you return to these sewers after the initial escape, you'll discover that they're populated by homeless NPCs who've established a small underground community. These characters have their own economy, trading stolen goods and scraps. They possess unique dialogue discussing their exile from surface society. Most players never encounter them because the sewers have no legitimate quest markers, pointing back to them after the opening sequence. The Winking Skeever's cellar. The Winking Skeever Tavern has a wine cellar that's mentioned in NPC dialogue, but never shown to players. The tavern keeper, Corpulus Vinius, occasionally mentions checking the cellar for his best vintages, and a trapdoor behind the bar seems to lead downward. Data miners found a fully modelled cellar interior in the game files, complete with wine racks, stored food, and sleeping quarters for the staff. It even contained a small shrine to Dibella, suggesting that Corpulus or his employees worshipped there privately. The decision to cut player access was likely made for performance reasons, as every interior cell requires memory allocation. Falk Firebeard's secret study. Falk Firebeard, the steward of the Blue Palace, maintains a private study separate from his official office, where he conducts research into supernatural threats. This room, accessible through a locked door most players never notice, contains books on vampire hunting, werewolf lore, and notes about various Daedric cults operating in Harfinger Hold. The study reveals that Falk takes his protective duties far more seriously than his public demeanour suggests. He's documented every strange occurrence in the region for decades, creating an archive of paranormal activity. One particularly interesting note discusses rumours of a vampire coven operating within Solitude itself, possibly among the nobility. The unused execution square. While players witness Rogvir's execution in the main square upon first entering Solitude, that execution block sees much more use if you pay attention to the city's schedule. Every 10 days, the block is prepared for another execution that occurs off-screen. Guards discuss the upcoming event, townsfolk gather to witness it, and afterward, NPCs debate whether the condemned deserve their fate. These executions happen in the background of the game world, with citizens referencing them in ambient dialogue. The victims are never named characters, but the practice demonstrates that Solitude maintains harsh justice. Blood stains that appear on the block persist for exactly 1 day before cleaning crews scrub them away. Styr's embalming technique. Styr, the priest who manages the Hall of the Dead, practices embalming techniques that are advanced for Skyrim's generally medieval technology level. If you examine his workstation closely, you'll find specialized tools, preservation fluids, and anatomical diagrams that suggest formal training. Styr's dialogue reveals he learned his craft in Cyrodiil, where imperial death customs are more elaborate than Nordic traditions. The Hall of the Dead contained bodies in various states of preparation, and Styr follows a careful process for each. he keeps detailed records of every person interred, including their cause of death. These records, written in books scattered throughout the hall, contain hints about several unsolved murders in Solitude's recent history. The Blue Palace Garden Mystery. The Blue Palace Courtyard features an ornamental garden that changes with the seasons, something most players never notice because they fast travel rather than observing the passage of time. In spring, snowdrops and frost flowers bloom. Summer brings hardy mountain roses. Autumn sees the addition of decorative gourds and dried wheat arrangements. Winter returns the garden to a sparse, snow-covered state. A dedicated gardener NPC tends these plants on a daily schedule, and if you talk to her repeatedly across different seasons, she shares her philosophy about finding beauty in harsh climates. She also mentions that one particular flower bed refuses to grow anything, supposedly because a tragic death occurred on that spot. Castle Dour's War Room. General Tullius conducts imperial military planning in a war room that contains far more strategic detail than most players observe during their brief visits. The massive table in the center features a scale model of all Skyrim, with colored markers representing troop positions, supply lines, and strategic objectives. These markers actually update based on your progress in the Civil War quest line, reflecting captured forts and shifted battle lines. If you examine the model closely after significant victories, you'll notice the changes. The walls display maps showing projected Stormcloak movements, intelligence reports about Ulfric's capabilities, and casualty estimates for various battle scenarios. This attention to detail reinforces that a real war is being prosecuted. The blacksmith's daughter, Bairand, the blacksmith at Castle Dour, occasionally mentions his daughter in passing dialogue that's easy to miss. She lives in Cyrodiil and is training to become an imperial battle mage. Beirand keeps a collection of her letters in his quarters, and reading them reveals a warm father-daughter relationship despite the distance. She writes about her studies in destruction magic, asks about his work crafting armor for the Legion, and expresses worry about the Civil War's outcome. In her most recent letter, she mentions plans to visit Solitude, but this visit never occurs during the game. The letters humanize Beirand beyond his role as a merchant, showing the personal costs of Skyrim's conflict on families separated by duty and circumstance. Radiant Raiment's secret client. The upscale clothing shop, Radiant Raiment, caters primarily to Solitude's wealthy elite, but the proprietor Tari occasionally mentions a mysterious client who commissions very specific garments. If you gain her trust through repeated purchases and the related quest, she'll reveal that this client is Pantaea, or rather, someone claiming to represent the long-dead Wolf Queen. The requests come through anonymous notes left at the shop, accompanied by payment in ancient gold coins from the First Era. Tari fulfills these orders because the money is real, but she's increasingly unsettled by the situation. The garments requested are burial clothes in the style of ancient Nordic royalty, suggesting someone is conducting necromantic rituals in Pantaea's name. The Angeline's aromatics mystery. Angeline Morad runs an apothecary shop, but her daughter disappeared years ago under mysterious circumstances. This backstory only emerges through a specific dialogue branch that many players never explore. Angeline's daughter, Fura, was a promising alchemist who traveled to various holds researching rare ingredients. She vanished while investigating reports of unique flora in the marshes near Morthal. Angeline maintains hope that Fura is alive, and if you bring her Fura's amulet, found in a random dungeon, it triggers a heartbreaking scene. The amulet's location randomizes for each playthrough, meaning some players may never find it. Returning it doesn't resolve the mystery, but provides Angeline with closure, knowing her daughter's fate. The Fletcher's hidden talent, Fihada, who works at Bairand's forge, is primarily known as a Fletcher crafting arrows and bows. However, examining his private quarters reveals he's also a talented painter. The walls display landscapes of various Skyrim locations, all painted from memory during his travels as a younger man. The paintings are detailed enough that you can identify specific landmarks: the Throat of the World, Lake Ilinalta, and the White River. Fihada never discusses this artistic side, and his dialogue focuses entirely on his practical craft. This hidden aspect of his character suggests that many Skyrim NPCs have rich inner lives that players never discover, because the game can't possibly expose every detail. The East Empire Company corruption. The East Empire Company's operations in Solitude involve more corruption than the main questline reveals. Documents scattered throughout their warehouse detail schemes to avoid imperial taxes, bribe city officials, and intimidate competitors. One ledger shows payments to Captain Aldis of the Solitude Guard, suggesting he looks the other way during illegal operations. Another set of papers discusses plans to manipulate trade routes to bankrupt smaller merchants. This corruption extends to exploitation of dock workers, who are paid in company script redeemable only at company stores, trapping them in debt. The blood on the ice quest in Windhelm briefly touches on East Empire Company involvement in criminal activity, but Solitude's branch is equally compromised. Evette-san's struggle. Evette-san operates a small stall in Solitude's market, selling produce she grows herself. Her personal story, revealed through scattered dialogue and a minor quest, illustrates the challenges faced by common merchants. She's fallen behind on rent payments to the city and faces eviction from her stall. The quest to help her involves recovering a shipment of spices from bandits, but even after resolving this, she continues to struggle financially. If you check back with her weeks later, she discusses how the wealthy merchants use their influence to squeeze out small traders. She represents countless NPCs who exist in Skyrim's economy, without the resources or connections to prosper, providing a ground-level view of class disparity in Tamriel society. The invisible window washers. Solitude's windows remain remarkably clean, despite the harsh coastal weather, and close observation reveals why. On specific days, NPC workers can be seen carrying buckets and rags through the streets on window washing routes. They follow predetermined paths, stopping at each major building. While the workers don't actually interact with the windows due to animation limitations, their presence and dialogue acknowledge this maintenance work. They complain about bird droppings, salt spray from the sea, and demanding property owners. This detail exists purely for atmospheric purposes, contributing to Solitude's feeling as a functioning city where mundane work continues regardless of the player's epic adventures. The Temple of the Divine's architecture. The Temple of the Divines in Solitude is the largest single religious structure in Skyrim, but its architectural style reveals a complicated history. The foundation and lower walls are built from stones that don't match the local quarries, suggesting they were imported or salvaged from an earlier structure. Historical records mention that the temple was reconstructed during the Third Era, after the original burned down during a riot protesting imperial religious policy. The current design incorporates Cyrodiilic architectural elements uncommon in Nordic buildings, particularly the rounded arches and decorative columns. This fusion of styles represents the Empire's cultural influence on Skyrim. The temple's size and grandeur also serve a political purpose, reminding visitors of imperial power. Roland's divided loyalty. Roland, the head priest at the Temple of the Divines, faces a conflict between his imperial religious duties and his Nordic heritage. His dialogue occasionally reveals this tension, particularly when discussing Talos worship, while publicly maintaining the imperial ban on Talos veneration. Roland privately struggles with this restriction. A hidden note in his quarters expresses doubt about the White Gold Concordat's legitimacy and questions whether political convenience should dictate religious doctrine. He never acts on these doubts, remaining loyal to his position, but the note reveals an internal conflict. Some players interpret this as cowardice, while others see it as a realistic portrayal of someone caught between conscience and duty in an authoritarian system. The Katariah's hidden history. The Emperor's ship, the Katariah, has a history that predates its current service. Documents found in the captain's quarters during the Dark Brotherhood quest line reveal that the vessel was captured from Somerset Isle pirates during a naval engagement 20 years prior. Rather than scrapping the ship, the Empire retrofitted it as an imperial transport. The Katariah's distinctive design reflects Altmer shipbuilding techniques, particularly its reinforced hull and magical preservation enchantments. These enchantments, maintained by Imperial battle mages, prevent rot and weather damage, explaining how a wooden ship remains seaworthy for decades. The ship's name honors a former empress, but High Elf sailors consider its continued service an insult to their people. Jala's unspoken crush. Jala, a young woman working at the Winking Skeever, harbors romantic feelings for someone in Solitude that she never acts upon. Careful observation of her behavior reveals that she watches Captain Aldis from afar, adjusting her schedule to coincide with his patrol route. She never speaks to him beyond polite greetings, assuming he's beyond her social station. This unrequited affection is never addressed in any quest, existing purely as a background detail. If you use console commands to force interaction between them, they have generic NPC dialogue, as no romantic path was programmed. This reflects the game's philosophy that not every story thread needs resolution, creating a world that feels lived in rather than existing solely for player interaction. The Solitude Headsman's tradition. The executioner who beheads Rogvir and other condemned prisoners follows traditions dating back centuries in Solitude. If you speak with guards about executions, they explain that the headsman's role is hereditary, passed from father to son. The current executioner inherited both the position and the ceremonial axe from his father, who inherited it from his father before him. The axe itself is enchanted to ensure clean, quick deaths, considered a mercy in Nordic culture. The headsman lives in a small home outside the city walls, as superstition holds that one who deals death professionally brings bad luck. Despite this isolation, the position commands respect, as the headsman serves justice on behalf of the Jarl. The hidden gambling ring. In the Winking Skeever's back rooms, a regular gambling operation runs during late night hours. While the game doesn't allow players to participate, NPCs discuss their winnings and losses in ambient dialogue. The games include dice, cards, and betting on fabricated gladiatorial matches from the Imperial City. Corpulus Vinius, the tavern keeper, takes a cut of the house profits in exchange for providing the space and keeping guards from investigating too closely. Some guards actually participate in the games while off duty, creating a system of mutual protection. The gambling ring represents Solitude's grey economy, where technically illegal activities persist because they serve social functions and don't threaten public order. Sorex Vinius's dreams. Sorex Vinius, son of the Winking Skeever's owner, has ambitions beyond tavern work that he shares if you build rapport with him. He dreams of becoming a bard, having secretly practiced the lute for years. His father dismisses these aspirations, expecting Sorex to take over the family business. Sorex's room contains a hidden lute under his bed and sheet music he's composed himself. His songs, which you never actually hear in-game, allegedly tell stories of Solitude's common people, the dock workers, servants, and craftsmen who make the city function. Sorex represents people throughout Skyrim trapped between family expectations and personal desires, unable to pursue their passions because practical concerns demand otherwise. The blacksmith's competition, Bairand's monopoly on smithing services at Castle Dour, faces challenges from other crafters in Solitude who resent his exclusive contract with the Imperial Legion. Bits, who runs the general store, occasionally grumbles about how military contracts distort the local economy, raising prices on materials while common citizens struggle. This economic tension reflects broader issues in Skyrim, where the civil war disrupts normal trade and the military's needs take priority over civilian welfare. Beirand himself seems unaware of these resentments, focused entirely on fulfilling his legion obligations. His obliviousness to the economic hardship his success causes illustrates how different social classes experience the same events from vastly different perspectives. The Grey Quarter that never was. Early in Skyrim's development, Solitude was planned to have its own equivalent of Windhelm's Grey Quarter, a district where Dunmer refugees lived in poverty. Evidence of this cut content appears in concept art showing a specific neighbourhood with distinctive Dunmer architecture grafted onto Solitude's Nordic buildings. The decision to remove this district likely came from wanting to differentiate the cities thematically, making Windhelm specifically notorious for its treatment of dark elves. However, scattered dialogue still references a foreign quarter in Solitude, where non-Nords supposedly cluster, suggesting remnants of this earlier design. The actual city lacks any such defined district, showing how game development involves constant revision and content cutting. Atar's mysterious past. Atar, Solitude's official executioner, reveals little about his background, but environmental clues paint an intriguing picture. His home contains weapons far beyond what an executioner would need, including rare enchanted blades and exotic armors from various provinces. Books on his shelves discuss advanced combat techniques used by master swordsmen. These possessions suggest Atar had a previous career as an adventurer or soldier before settling into his current role. One letter fragment mentions leaving that life behind and seeking simpler work. This implies that serving as executioner represents retirement for Atar, a way to utilize his combat skills without the dangers of his former profession. Players who befriend him never learn his full story as he deflects personal questions. The missing children. Solitude has notably few children compared to other major cities, and there's an in-law explanation that most players miss. Dialogue with parents reveals that wealthy families send their children to boarding schools in Cyrodiil, considering it safer and more prestigious than local education. The few children who remain, like Jarirah's niece, come from families who can't afford this option or choose to keep their children close despite the risks. This practice reflects the anxiety among Solitude's elite about the civil war's potential impact on their children. It also demonstrates class division, as common folk keep their children nearby out of necessity, while the wealthy export them to perceived safety. The Lighthouse Keeper's fate. Though the Lighthouse mentioned earlier was cut from the game, NPC dialogue still references a Lighthouse Keeper position. Occasionally, guards or dock workers mention that the Lighthouse Keeper hasn't been seen in weeks, and someone should check on him. Following these dialogue hints leads nowhere, as no related quest exists. This creates an unresolved mystery hanging over Solitude. Players who investigate thoroughly never find satisfaction, which some interpret as sloppy writing, but others see as realistic, acknowledging that not every concern gets addressed, especially during wartime. The missing keeper becomes one of many casualties or unexplained disappearances that plague Skyrim's troubled times. The Blue Palace construction. The Blue Palace wasn't always Solitude's seat of power. Books found in the city's library explain that it was constructed during the Second Era, replacing an earlier wooden fort that burned down during a succession crisis. The palace's distinctive blue-tinged stone was imported from High Rock at enormous expense, demonstrating the wealth of the Jarl who commissioned it. This choice of foreign materials sparked controversy among traditionalist Nords, who viewed it as abandoning their heritage. The palace's name derives from this blue stone rather than any association with water or sky. Its construction marked a shift in Solitude's identity, from a military outpost to an administrative capital where politics and culture mattered as much as martial strength. Sybille Stentor's true nature. Sybille Stentor serves as court wizard to Jarl Elisif, but careful attention to her behavior and dialogue reveals she's likely a vampire. She's never seen during daytime, always remaining in the palace's interior. Her skin has an unnatural pallor, and she possesses knowledge of events from centuries ago that no normal person could remember firsthand. During vampire-related quests, she displays unusual sympathy for vampire interests. Most damningly, using detection spells near her sometimes triggers vampire sight indicators. Despite these clues, no quest addresses her nature, suggesting either the character was intended for cut content or the developers enjoyed planting hints for observant players. Elisif either doesn't know or tolerate Sybille's vampirism because of her valuable counsel. The Castle Dour courtyard drills. The courtyard at Castle Dour sees regular military drills that operate on a schedule most players never observe. At specific times, Legion soldiers gather for formation practice, weapons training, and ceremonial inspections. These drills continue even if the player joins the Stormcloaks and the civil war turns against the Empire, suggesting either stubborn persistence or an oversight in quest scripting. The drills aren't mere background animations. The soldiers follow actual training sequences and officers bark realistic commands. This attention to detail reinforces that Castle Dour functions as an active military installation rather than merely a quest location. The Legion's discipline and organisation contrast sharply with the Stormcloak's more irregular approach to warfare. The jarring problem. Elisif's position as Jarl faces a peculiar legal complication that Thanes occasionally discuss. Technically, she became Jarl through marriage to Torgig, who himself held the position after his father's death. With Torgig dead and no children, Elisif's claim rests on shaky ground, according to ancient Nordic law, which typically doesn't recognize authority passing through widowhood. The Empire backs her claim primarily because she's loyal, and installing a new Jarl might spark succession disputes. This legal ambiguity creates political vulnerability that Elisif's rivals could exploit. Her efforts to appear strong and capable stem partly from compensating for this questioned legitimacy. Traditional Nords view her as an imperial puppet, while imperial officials see her as a useful but ultimately replaceable figurehead. The Sawmill's dark secret. Solitude Sawmill, visible from the city but technically outside its walls, has a disturbing history that environmental storytelling hints at. Bloodstains on the ground near the mill suggest violence occurred there, and workers occasionally mention accidents that happened to previous employees. A journal hidden in the mill's office describes how the owners work employees to exhaustion, and those who complain about conditions tend to disappear. The implication is that the mill disposes of troublesome workers, either through murder or by forcing them into dangerous situations that result in fatal accidents. This grimness reflects the harsh realities of Skyrim's working class, where life is cheap and employers face little accountability for mistreatment. The temple's political function. The Temple of the Divines serves political purposes beyond religious ones, functioning as a tool of imperial soft power. Roland's sermons, when actually attended and listened to, frequently emphasize obedience to legitimate authority, the sins of rebellion, and the divine right of the Empire. He frames the Stormcloak uprising in religious terms as a violation of sacred oaths. This political preaching is subtle enough that many miss it, but it reveals how the Empire uses religion to manufacture consent. The temple's prominent position in Solitude and its funding by the imperial government create a relationship where the church legitimizes state power in exchange for material support and legal protection. The blacksmith's forge mystery. Bairand's forge at Castle Dour produces weapons and armor for the Legion, but the quality of his work raises questions about his training. Examining the equipment closely reveals craftsmanship far superior to typical Skyrim smithing, incorporating techniques common in Cyrodiilic workshops. Dialogue reveals that Beirand trained at the Imperial City's prestigious smithing guild before taking his current position. His forge contains specialized tools unavailable elsewhere in Skyrim, including a quenching system using imported oils that improve steel's properties. This expertise explains why the Legion maintains an exclusive contract with him rather than using local smiths. It also highlights how the Empire's institutional knowledge and resources give it advantages over the Stormcloak's more improvised supply chains. The market's seasonal changes. Solitude's outdoor market changes inventory based on seasons, something only long-term observation reveals. In winter, vendors stock preserved foods, warm clothing, and firewood. Spring brings fresh produce, seeds for planting, and lighter garments, Summer sees exotic imports from trading ships, including rare ingredients and luxury goods. Autumn features harvest foods, hunting equipment, and preparations for winter. These changes reflect an actual economy responding to seasonal needs rather than static game mechanics. Vendors discuss how seasonal variations affect their profits, with some specializing in particular times of year. This detail contributes to Solitude feeling like a real city, with natural economic cycles rather than a static video game environment. The Bard's College Secret Entrance. The Bard's College has a hidden entrance that students use for sneaking out after curfew. A loose panel in the college's outer wall, accessible from an alley, leads into the storage rooms. If you find and use this entrance, you'll trigger unique dialogue from college members who catch you, assuming you're a wayward student. The entrance was clearly designed for a quest that got cut, possibly involving helping or pranking college students. It remains fully functional in the final game, even though no quest directs you to it. Finding it requires thorough exploration of Solitude's back alleys and attention to environmental clues like scuff marks on walls indicating regular use. Pantaea's lost composition. Pantaea Atar, one of the Bard's College instructors, mentions that she's working on a musical composition dedicated to the beauty of Solitude. She's frustrated because she can't find the right melody to capture the city's essence. This composition is never completed during the game, but her ongoing struggle represents the artistic process's difficulty. Other bards occasionally ask about her progress, and she always deflects, saying she's still seeking inspiration. This unfinished work serves as a metaphor for Solitude itself, a city trying to maintain beauty and culture while torn by war and political intrigue. Pantaea's artistic block mirrors the city's inability to fully realize its potential as Skyrim's cultural capital. The guard rotation system. Solitude's guards follow a complex rotation system that maintains constant patrols throughout the city. Individual guards work 12-hour shifts, with the roster cycling every few days. Observation reveals that guards change positions at specific times, walking to the barracks for shift change, while relief guards take over their posts. This system, far more detailed than necessary for gameplay purposes, demonstrates Bethesda's commitment to creating a believable city. The guards even have names and personalities, occasionally referencing personal lives and relationships with other NPCs. Some guards are more competent than others, with different detection ranges and combat capabilities, adding another layer of individual variation to supposedly generic NPCs. The missing Stormcloak spy, Imperial intelligence, mentioned in scattered documents at Castle Dour, believes a Stormcloak spy operates within Solitude, feeding information to Ulfric about troop movements and political decisions. General Tullius occasionally discusses this suspected infiltration with Legate Riker, expressing frustration at being unable to identify the spy. However, no questline allows players to uncover this mole, and it's unclear whether the spy actually exists, or if Imperial paranoia sees threats where none exist. This ambiguity creates tension in Solitude's atmosphere, where everyone potentially suspects their neighbors. If you join the Stormcloaks and participate in intelligence gathering activities, you never interact with this supposed spy, deepening the mystery. The Dockworkers Union. Solitude's dockworkers have formed an informal union to negotiate better conditions with the East Empire Company, though the word union is never used in-game. Groups of dock workers meet in the Winking Skeever to discuss collective action, including work slowdowns when demands for higher pay aren't met. The company responds with intimidation tactics, including hiring thugs to assault union leaders. This labor conflict plays out in background dialogue and occasional violent encounters near the docks. It represents class struggle within Tamriel's feudal economy, where workers have little formal power but can still resist exploitation through solidarity. The conflict never resolves during the game, ongoing without player involvement or impact. The Burning of the Wolf, Solitude's most famous historical event, the burning of King Olaf, is reenacted annually during a festival celebrated by the Bard's College. However, the festival's current form sanitizes a much darker historical reality. The original King Olaf burned was actually a symbolic execution of an effigy representing a political enemy, not a celebration of defeating a dragon. Historical texts in the college's library reveal that earlier versions of the festival involved genuine human sacrifice, with criminals or prisoners of war burned in the effigy instead of straw. This practice continued into the Third Era before imperial authorities banned it as barbaric. Modern celebrations retain the symbolism while abandoning the brutality. The Blue Palace's underground. Beneath the Blue Palace lies a network of passages and storage chambers that players glimpse during the Wolf Queen Awakened quest. These underground areas extend further than the quest reveals, connecting to natural caverns beneath Solitude's stone arch. Developers created extensive catacomb networks that remain unexplored in the final game, containing additional undead enemies, treasure, and lore books about Solitude's history. Data miners have explored these cut areas, finding fully detailed environments that would have expanded the quest significantly. The decision to truncate this content likely came from pacing concerns, avoiding having players spend too long underground. The unused areas remain in the game files, accessible through console commands or mods. Captain Aldis's military service. Captain Aldis, who commands Solitude's Guard, is a military veteran who served in the Great War against the Aldemary Dominion. His dialogue occasionally references this service, mentioning battles in Cyrodiil and the trauma of watching the Empire struggle against the Thalmor. This background explains his loyalty to the Empire despite the controversial White Gold Concordat. He views the Stormcloak Rebellion as a betrayal of those who died fighting the Dominion, believing Skyrim needs Imperial unity to face future threats. His military experience also makes him effective at maintaining order in Solitude, combining combat prowess with administrative skill. Some guards served under him during the war, creating bonds that strengthened the city's defenses. The Winking Skeever's name. Origin. The Winking Skeever's unusual name has an explanation that Corpulus Vinius shares with regular customers. The tavern was named after his grandfather's pet skeever, a domesticated specimen trained to perform tricks. The skeever had a nervous condition causing one eye to spasm, creating the appearance of winking. This beloved pet became a local attraction, and when the grandfather opened his tavern, he commemorated the creature by naming it the Winking Skeever and commissioning a sign featuring a skeever's face with one eye closed. The story is absurd enough that some think Corpulus invented it, but he maintains its truthfulness. Either way, the name generates conversation and makes the tavern memorable. The Solitude genealogy. Many of Solitude's prominent families have genealogies extending back centuries, with family trees documented in the Blue Palace's archives. These records reveal extensive intermarriage among Solitude's elite, creating a tight web of kinship that influences politics and business. The Vici family, for instance, has married into the Shattershield and Cruel-Sea families of Windhelm, creating economic alliances across the Civil War's divide. This aristocratic network operates above politics in some ways, with family loyalty sometimes trumping allegiance to Jarl or empire. Understanding these connections explains certain characters' behavior and the complexity of Solitude's power structure. Common citizens remain outside this network, facing barriers to social mobility. The Harbour Expansion Project. Documents in the East Empire Company warehouse describe plans for expanding Solitude's harbour to accommodate larger ships and increase trade volume. The project has stalled due to the Civil War, diverting resources and labour. Architectural plans show a proposed second pier, enlarged warehouse facilities, and improved docking systems. The company argues the expansion would benefit all Solitude, while critics claim it primarily serves corporate interests and would disrupt fishing grounds used by common folk. This debate reflects tension between economic development and traditional livelihoods, a conflict playing out across Skyrim as the province modernizes. The expansion never happens during the game, remaining a future possibility. The Fletcher's romance. Fihada, Bairand's assistant, is in a secret relationship with a merchant's daughter, whose family considers him beneath their station. They meet clandestinely in various locations around Solitude, trying to avoid detection. If you observe the city's NPCs carefully, you'll occasionally spot them together in quiet corners, having brief conversations before separating. Fihada's dialogue never explicitly mentions the relationship, but letters in his room describe meeting times and express affection. The merchant father suspects the relationship and has warned Fihada away, threatening economic consequences if the romance continues. This subplot never develops into a quest, existing purely as background texture, showing that NPCs have lives independent of player involvement. The Jarl's empty throne. The High King's throne in the Blue Palace sits empty, a constant reminder of Torgic's death and the political crisis his assassination created. Elisif sits on the smaller Jarl's throne beside it, never presuming to occupy her husband's seat. This physical arrangement symbolizes her political situation, wielding local authority, but unable to claim the kingship. Some courtiers discuss whether she should destroy or remove the High King's throne, but she refuses, maintaining it as a memorial. The throne's emptiness has become a pilgrimage site for Torgic's supporters, who leave small offerings at its base. This transforms a piece of furniture into a political symbol, representing both loss and contested legitimacy. The lighthouse beacon type. Though the lighthouse isn't accessible, examining it from various angles reveals it uses a fire-based beacon rather than a magical light source. This detail demonstrates practical limitations on magic in Skyrim's economy. While mages could theoretically create permanent light enchantments, the cost exceeds most practical applications. Fire beacons, maintained by burning oil or wood, provide a cheaper alternative. The lighthouse keeper's job would have involved ensuring the beacon never went dark, hauling fuel up the tower stairs, and maintaining the reflective surfaces that amplified the flame. This mundane explanation for a seemingly magical structure grounds Skyrim's world in realistic economic and technical constraints. The courtyard vendor competition. The market stalls in Solitude's main courtyard operate in fierce competition despite their proximity. Vendors undercut each other's prices, poach customers, and spread rumours about competitors' goods. This economic rivalry creates tension that occasionally erupts into arguments. Greta, who sells fruits and vegetables, has a particular feud with the fishmonger, claiming his spoiled wares smell so bad they drive customers away from her stall. These disputes add life to the marketplace, showing that merchants are people with genuine conflicts rather than mere shopping interfaces. The Jarl's guards occasionally intervene to prevent physical altercations, enforcing order in commerce. The execution block's age. The execution block where Rogvir dies has been in continuous use for over 200 years, with generations of condemned prisoners meeting their end on its blood-stained surface. Guards who discuss executions mention that the block is carved from a single piece of ancient stone, supposedly blessed by priests to ensure clean executions that honor the condemned's final moments. The block's age and history give it ceremonial significance beyond its practical function. Some believe that the spirits of the executed linger near the block, and sensitive individuals report feeling watched when passing by at night. This folklore adds supernatural dimension to an otherwise mundane object. The college's curriculum dispute. The Bard's College faculty debate curriculum philosophy, with some instructors favouring traditional Nordic songs and others pushing for incorporating imperial musical theory. This dispute mirrors Skyrim's broader cultural conflict between preserving Nordic identity and embracing imperial influence. Girald Gemain represents the imperial faction, having studied in Cyrodiil and advocating for theoretical rigour. Inge's Six Fingers champions Nordic tradition, teaching folk songs passed down through oral tradition. Their disagreement occasionally becomes heated, with students caught between competing philosophies. This academic conflict never reaches crisis, but it creates ongoing tension within the college, reflecting larger questions about Skyrim's cultural future. The temple's underground crypt. Beneath the Temple of the Divines lies a crypt housing the remains of Solitude's previous rulers and notable citizens. This crypt is mentioned in dialogue but never shown to players. Priests describe it as a sacred space where the dead rest until the gods call them to Sovngarde. The crypt supposedly contains treasures buried with the deceased, including ancient weapons and armor, making it a tempting target for grave robbers. However, religious prohibitions and the crypt's location under constant guard make theft nearly impossible. The crypt's existence adds depth to Solitude's history, suggesting generations of accumulated dead beneath the city's busy streets. The East Empire Company's company, Scrip. The East Empire Company pays dock workers partially in company scrip, a private currency redeemable only at company stores for goods at inflated prices. This system traps workers in debt, as their scrip wages never quite cover their expenses, forcing them to borrow additional money from the company at high interest rates. Workers discuss this exploitation in taverns, expressing frustration but feeling powerless to change the system. The company argues that scrip protects workers from spending wages on alcohol and gambling, framing exploitation as paternalistic concern. This economic arrangement mirrors historical company towns, where employers controlled workers' lives through monetary manipulation. The Blue Palace's architectural influence. The Blue Palace's distinctive architecture influenced building styles throughout Harfinger Hold, with local jarls and wealthy merchants commissioning structures imitating its features. Buildings throughout Solitude incorporate blue stone accents, decorative arches, and other elements copied from the palace. This architectural influence represents cultural power, with the ruling class's aesthetic preferences spreading throughout the region. However, these imitation buildings use painted wood rather than genuine blue stone, creating superficial resemblance without substance. This distinction between authentic and imitation becomes a class marker, allowing the truly wealthy to demonstrate their status through expensive materials, while lesser nobles make do with appearances. The Dour courtyard secret meetings. In Castle Dour's courtyard, late at night when most NPCs sleep, Imperial officers occasionally hold secret meetings discussing strategies they won't share publicly. These meetings can be stumbled upon if you're in the area at odd hours, though the officers won't acknowledge your presence beyond generic greetings. Their conversations reveal doubts about the Civil War's outcome, concerns about supply lines, and frank assessments of various Legion commanders' competence. These private discussions contrast sharply with the confident public face the Empire presents, showing that military leaders understand the war's challenges even while maintaining morale through optimistic rhetoric. The missing children's toys. Throughout Solitude, perceptive players notice toys left in various locations. A wooden sword near the market, a doll by the temple steps, a ball in an alley. These objects suggest children's presence despite the lack of child NPCs. The toys serve as environmental storytelling, indicating that children do exist in Solitude, but aren't represented in the game engine due to technical limitations and content concerns. The developers chose to suggest children's existence through props, rather than include child NPCs beyond a bare minimum. This approach maintains the illusion of a populated city, while avoiding controversial scenarios involving children in a game featuring significant violence. The Solitude Cemetery Ghosts. The Hall of the Dead, while primarily a functional space for managing corpses, has a reputation for supernatural activity. Styr occasionally mentions seeing ghosts of the recently deceased wandering the halls, though he attributes this to trick of light and shadow. However, if you visit the Hall of the Dead at midnight, there's a chance spectral figures will appear briefly among the crypts. These ghosts don't attack or interact with players, simply manifesting for a few seconds before fading. Some players report never seeing them, suggesting the spawns are rare random events. The ghosts add gothic atmosphere to Solitude, reinforcing themes of death and loss. The Winking Skeever's secret room. Behind a false panel in the Winking Skeever's storage area lies a small room used for private meetings between criminals and corrupt officials. Pelagius Vinius rents this space at premium rates to those seeking discretion, claiming ignorance of what transpires there. The room contains a table, chairs, and surprisingly, soundproofing enchantments that prevent eavesdropping. Players can discover this room through careful exploration, finding evidence of various illicit deals conducted there. However, no quest involves the space, and you never encounter it being used. Its existence suggests Solitude's criminal underworld operates more extensively than quests reveal. The Penitus Oculatus presence. Members of the Penitus Oculatus, the Emperor's secret intelligence service, operate throughout Solitude despite most citizens being unaware of their presence. These agents dress as common citizens and blend into crowds while monitoring for threats. Commander Maro, who appears during the Dark Brotherhood questline, leads this network from his base in Dragonbridge. His agents in Solitude report on political sentiments, watch for assassins, and investigate security threats. After the Emperor's assassination, these agents conduct an investigation interviewing NPCs and searching for evidence. Their presence demonstrates that the Empire maintains surveillance networks even in friendly cities. The architecture's defensive purpose. Solitude's buildings are arranged not just aesthetically, but strategically for defense. The narrow streets create choke points where small forces can hold against larger armies. Buildings are positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire for archers. The city's single main entrance becomes a fatal funnel for attackers. These defensive considerations reflect that Solitude, despite its current role as administrative capital, was designed originally as a military stronghold. The city's architect understood siege warfare, creating a layout that leverages the natural stone arch's defensive advantages while minimizing weaknesses. This military heritage influences daily life, with some residents complaining that the narrow streets make moving goods difficult. The blacksmith's apprentice dreams. An apprentice, Smith sometimes visits Bairand's forge, hoping to learn from the master craftsman, but repeatedly rebuffed. This young Nord appears in Solitude streets occasionally, watching Bairand work from a distance. Bairand refuses to take apprentices, explaining that his Legion contract keeps him too busy for teaching. The apprentice represents countless young people in Skyrim seeking opportunities for advancement but facing barriers. Without mentorship, these aspiring craftspeople struggle to develop their skills, perpetuating economic inequality. The apprentice eventually stops appearing, presumably having given up or found other opportunities. This minor tragedy plays out without player involvement, one of many background stories. The final secret. Solitude's greatest secret lies in its foundation. The natural stone arch supporting the city is slowly eroding, with geological surveys suggesting it could collapse within a century. City engineers know this but keep it quiet to prevent panic and economic disaster. Reinforcement efforts continue quietly, but ultimately, Solitude may need to abandon its dramatic perch and rebuild elsewhere. This existential threat hangs over the city, known only to a few. It adds poignancy to Solitude's beauty, suggesting that even Skyrim's greatest cities are temporary, subject to natural forces beyond mortal control. The Arch will stand through the game's events, but Solitude's long-term future remains uncertain.